We're good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. Ms. McCoy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and I can see you. And I just want to
Okay.
thank you and all the others behind you for your patience and your persistence today. And welcome to the committee. Please proceed, Ms. McCoy.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, all. As the lead volunteer advocate for all affected homeowners, I support Bill 6646 in its entirety. However, as the only affected homeowner signed up to testify, I want to concentrate on quarry standards. It is my hope that the state of Connecticut will put the housing consumers before the self-regulated quarries and bring some oversight to the industry. Quarries will have to prove the quality of their aggregate by submitting a geological source report to the state of Connecticut geologists. Because there are no safety nets for the housing consumer with regards to foundations crumbling due to a deleterious mineral such as peritite, the state of Connecticut is obligated to protect its citizens from a self-regulated industry that has had one quarry that tapped into a rock with an abundance of peritite. The cost to remediate the foundation is astronomical and has a ripple effect like nothing the state has seen before. We need to protect future homeowners from the economical and emotional toll this takes on the homeowner, family members, neighbors, towns, mill rates, real estate market, banks, and taxpayers. Both of my children have homes in Vernon affected by peritite. My daughter's home will cost $235,000 to replace the foundation. That doesn't include the cost to refinish her basement, the stone sidewalk, the desks, the landscape, and the driveway. My son's condo unit will cost $82,000 per unit for the cost to replace the foundation, demolition of the finished basement, removing and reattaching the decks, paying for the cost of dividing walls, and that doesn't include the sidewalks, landscape, and roads. The toll and burden this has placed on my son for the last 5 years while waiting for word that his condo building will be repaired has been unsurmountable. And thankfully, after 5 long years, his building will be repaired this May 2021. But my daughter with twin baby girls and her son due in June 2021, 3 children under 2, will be a pending claimant for many years. And she learned 6 days prior to the CIFSIC closing the doors to active claimants that her foundation was crumbling. My daughter is in line to nowhere, horrifically waiting and wondering, will her home stand the test of time as it was built in 1998 and is a severity class code 3. The fate of my children and the over 500 pending claimants rests in your hand. The future of homeowners rests in your hand. The oversight this law can bring to the self-regulated quarries and make certain this law applies to all quarries, regardless of the end user, applying to all producers of aggregate, as some of the uses, such as backfill around the new foundation, can be just as damaging. I know I could sleep better at night knowing that all quarries in Connecticut were being asked to submit geological source reports. We would have safeguards for all consumers of aggregate. Thank you for this opportunity to testify and for all your efforts as well. Did I make the 3 minutes?
You were perfect. And Ms. McCoy, I just want to say your efforts and what you have put into this on behalf of so many people have just been tremendous and are not going unnoticed. It's really amazing what you've done in the midst of what you're facing within your own family. It's really something. Yeah. So thank you very much for being here. I know Rep. Winkler has a question.
First, I believe all the members of your family whom you mentioned are constituents of mine.
Yes, they are. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Winkler.
My pleasure. And I'm one of the many many legislators who have made the pilgrimage to your house to get educated on these matters.
Yes.
Would you be in favor of yearly reports on the quarries? We had somebody earlier testify that might be a bit excessive.
Well, I was appointed to that working quarry group panel of 8 members. And I was the only affected homeowner on that panel. And we did discuss it. We were not reinventing the wheel. We were actually taking the New York standards and applying them to Connecticut. And with the New York standards, it does ask for annually. However, here in Connecticut, I mean, New York has hundreds of quarries, but here in Connecticut, we have 42. And we have a ridge, as you know, a vein that has the peritite. So I think Mr. Schubert was correct in that 4 years would be acceptable. However, with some of the quarries, they may need to have it done annually. Also, one of the things I wanted to point out about is when we were doing the working quarry group, the second version said step 1, aggregate producers provide a geological source report by a geologist. Then when they came to the meeting at the final meeting with the final draft, they added the word concrete. So it changed from aggregate producers provide a GSR to aggregates of concrete. Now Becker's Quarry caused this. I don't know if you can see this map, but these are all the towns that have been affected by Becker's Quarry. This is all of Connecticut, and this is all of Massachusetts. We have 47 towns in Connecticut and 21 towns in Massachusetts. Now, with this new law, by adding concrete, you are taking the actual quarry that caused this crisis and giving him a pass and saying, oh, no, don't worry. You say that you only use your quarry now for everything but concrete. So you don't have to submit to this, but the other 41 quarries do, which haven't caused this. So it's kind of undermining the whole purpose of what I thought we were doing in the working quarry group, was that all 42 quarries should have to submit to a GSR.
Now, when the aggregate leaves Becker's Quarry, it's
Correct.
not supposed to be used for foundations. But what happens in real life?
In real life, there is no chain of custody. I met with the Attorney General in 2018, and we explained that to the Attorney General. And we noted that the aggregates get sold to secondary sources. And the AVC that the state of Connecticut has Becker sign, it is just for residential foundations in Connecticut. They can still sell their aggregate to unsuspecting homeowners in Massachusetts. So by not having them submit to this, these are the actual uses that Beckers say they use their aggregate for: drainage, road base, road maintenance, parking lot base, winter sand, asphalt, bedding sand, backfilling, driveways, and a number of other uses. Backfilling around a foundation with their aggregate is just as damaging as putting it in the concrete in your walls. So we have to consider that you're making 41 quarries abide by this, but because they simply state, we don't sell it for concrete anymore, you're giving the one quarry that caused 1,729 applicants who have applied to CIVSIC in 47 towns, you're giving them a pass.
Yes, I don't know why they would be allowed to use it in sidewalks. In my door-to-door, one of the first times I realized there was a problem was in one neighborhood, people's sidewalks were turning to dust.
Yes, exactly.
The seam in Connecticut that runs through Becker's Quarry, does it run all the way up to Canada?
Yes, it does. It runs through Connecticut, all the way through Massachusetts up to Canada. I actually have a map that shows that as well. Here's Massachusetts, here's Connecticut, here's Massachusetts, and it goes right up to Canada. So yes, that vein does. And I know Massachusetts is trying to, because I set up a Zoom meeting between Senator Anwar and Senator Goby of Mass. So I know they're trying to start their own standards for quarries as well. And New York has their standards. Pennsylvania has their standards. Texas has their standards. Connecticut, we're the only state in the United States that has this many homes affected. We have no standards, and we're going to give Beckers a pass with this new law.
All right. Does the law, the bill that you're looking at that we have before us, does it do what needs to be done?
It does in many respects. It would have been perfect if we had left it as CCIA came with this second proposal recommendation. And on it, it says step 1, aggregate producers provide a geological source report by a geologist. Their third version stated aggregate for concrete. So by adding that word concrete, you have now taken Beckers out of the picture. So I think it should be for all quarries, regardless of the end user, because they're using it for backfill. Do I want backfill around my daughter's new foundation once her as a pending claimant gets to have financial aid? No, I don't want Becker's backfill around her foundation, because we're going to have the same problem years to come.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. And wow, you have such a breadth of knowledge on these issues. It's amazing. Representative
Encyclopedia.
Rep. Gucker.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Even though my screen's been off all day, I've been actually listening, and I can tell you what the lifespan of our laptop battery is between having to plug it in and out of my many trips. But that being said, good evening, Ms. McCoy. I have a couple of questions of what I learned. I also serve as vice chair in the banking committee, and I know Representative, I just went brain dead. It's been a long day. We've been discussing the crumbling foundations for a long time.
Yes.
And one of the things that I learned, and I wanted to just run this by you, was I thought there was a problem that if we used some of this contaminated stone as fill,
Right.
as gravel, and then we poured a concrete pad over it, or if we poured a footing or a foundation over it. But the problem is that this peritite that's in the aggregate, it expands, it corrodes and expands and deteriorates and then heaves and pushes. Am I correct in that?
Yes, you are, very much so. As a matter of fact, when I flew Ohio geologist Nick Scaglione into Connecticut to address 100 legislators and town leaders in South Windsor, the first thing he did, I showed him the letter that Beckers wrote to Senator Anwar back in August of 2018. And he looked at the list of things, drainage, road base, and he got to backfilling, and he said, oh, no. They shouldn't be using that aggregate for backfilling at all. So right now, the AVC only applies to residential foundations. It doesn't apply to commercial buildings, public buildings. And we have in the town of Towland, public structures like Birch Grove and commercial buildings like the dance studio and Bill's Auto Body and the firehouse, all affected by the peritite. So the AVC only talks about the residential foundations. It doesn't talk about backfilling, and it doesn't talk about the commercial and public structures that are actually affected by this aggregate. Thank you for that question. And I think you were talking about Representative Jason Doucette.
Actually, I was talking about, it was actually Representative Delnicki.
Okay, well, in the banking committee, both of them.
Yeah, Jason is as well. I just went, it's been, I can't tell you how many hours of this today, and my brain kind of stopped working a few hours ago. And you're right. And that was one of the things that I felt went to your description of why we need to expand this to all aggregate, not just what goes
all
in
42
the concrete,
quarries,
but what actually would be used for fill. in a former life, I used to design and supervise commercial construction and design pre-engineered steel buildings. So I understand a lot of what you're going through and what the structural issues that you're going through as well. And also the importance of having quality fill that's not going to heave, push, and be able to be compacted correctly so that there's no further problems. So that was my concern. I wanted to get that on the record that I think
Thank
you're
you.
absolutely right. It should be more
I
than
agree.
just the stone that's going in the concrete, but it also should be any stone, because we don't know, if they sell it. We had a problem here in Danbury, where I represent, many years ago, where people were picking up soils that weren't tested, and they turned out to be contaminated soils because there was no standard for testing before. Somebody was offering free soil. People thought they were doing good. They had it delivered to their house. They did their yard work, only to find out that they had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of environmental remediation because everything was contaminated. So I can understand how we need to make sure, that we check this out from the source and protect the consumer. Thank you very much for testifying. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Gucker. And I appreciate your comments about the battery. That's why I've just stayed plugged in all day. Ms. McCoy, you talked about your children, and as a mom, that's got to be one of the hardest things, especially hearing how your daughter has little ones and then another one on the way. You talked about the fact that it was 6 days before, and
Yeah.
and two parts that I wanted to ask you about. You said severity class code 3. So I haven't been to your dining room yet. It sounds like I need to come visit.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
It would be just to share what that means exactly and how the process is working. I know that they've done a bunch. We're going to hear later from CIFSIC, but how the process is working in terms of funding and getting to people like your daughter. Can you share about
Okay,
that?
so 6 days before CIFSIC closed its doors to active claimants, they had reached 1,197 claimants. And they were going against the funds that they were to receive up to June 2022. My daughter was bringing home her twin baby daughters from the NICU. They were in the NICU for 75 days. We were so excited to have them come home with the twins. And my husband and I were clearing out the baby's room and bringing all the baby shower gifts down to the basement. And the utility door happened to be open. Now the basement's beautiful, it's finished. We walked by it, and at the corner of my eye, I saw map cracking all over the unfinished wall. And instead of tears of joy, I dropped to my knees and started crying hysterically. For 2 days, I was inconsolable. I couldn't even go to work because I knew what that map cracking all over the wall meant. And within 6 days, before we even could hire a structural engineer, CIFSIC closed the doors. So my daughter had to wait from August until January 2020. September, October, November, December, January. 5 months she waited. And they reopened the doors to pending claimants. Now they have over 500 pending claimants who are in a line to nowhere. And that's disheartening, because it just took me 5 years to bring all those condo owners to the finish line this year. I run the Condo 5 group. I also run the Concrete Queens, and I also am the admin on 2 sites on Facebook. So I give information to over 800 members every day on a daily basis. And all of them, all those pending claimants are all right now watching my testimony and praying that you pass this law that will extend the sunset date for the captive, extend the reassessments, and also fund more funding to the captive insurance. So that was your first question. And then your second question was, class code 3. So she is a severity class code 3, which is the worst of the worst. The structural engineer that came out to her home said she has about 5 years. Now, this is a house she spent over $400,000 to buy. She paid top dollar for it, asking price, and then our world collapsed when we brought home the twins. So the engineer had looked at it and said, you know, the chimney is starting to separate from the home. Now, this is scary, having 2 little preemie twin little granddaughters and another little baby on the way in June. So her home is a class code 3, and there are many class code 3s that are pending. So yes, the surcharge later will start working for them, but that won't be for another 6 years. So Chaffa's loan to the captive would help immensely.
I think to say it would help immensely, it sounds like there's a decent amount of backlog because there's a limitation on the funds that have been made available to date. And
right. $10 million of the surcharge funding will take care of 60 homes a year. Right now, their first year, they did about 90 homes. Their second year, they did 190 homes. So, and now this year, they're going to work on doing many of the condos. At the condo my son that I helped him buy, there's 124 units affected. And this year, we're going to work on 38 of the 124 units. So we're excited about that. And Wellington this Saturday will be lifting their condo, one of their buildings, and I'll actually be at that, and as will the media. So that's very exciting that with SIP6 funding, thanks to you and the legislators, we are going to have the first condo complex with SIP6 funding being lifted. And we've waited 5 years for this. 5 long years.
Ms. McCoy, I would say thanks to you. I would also say special thanks to Rep. Curry, especially, and the entire bipartisan Crumbling Concrete caucus, who has worked really diligently together. But you are clearly an engine behind all of this. I'm really glad to know that that fix with the condos, because they've certainly been affected, is, you know, that we are seeing some real progress. It's really tremendous. I want to thank you again for staying with us today. I'm really glad that you did, because your testimony is so important to this conversation. And as I said earlier today, we will continue to work with that bipartisan group to make sure that we get this just right for all of you and all of the impacted folks in so many communities throughout our state. Thank you, Ms. McCoy.
Thank you very much.
Next on our list tonight, we have Douglas Thompson, followed by Liz Tomasino. Mr. Thompson, welcome. Please proceed.
Thank you. Douglas Thompson, Burlington, Connecticut. Thank you again for allowing me an opportunity to express why I do not support the litany of legislation in HB 6611, 6612, 6613, SB 1024, 1068. First is the issue of transparency. The proposed legislation is being pushed by a small number of well-organized groups. A lot of the testimony is coming from members of these well-organized groups. The average citizen is not aware of these proposed legislations. I reached out to our local zoning officials this weekend, and they were not aware, but are very concerned, and they do not support these mandates. No one I have spoken to in my community is aware of these zoning bills. I have issues with a lot of the testimonies from individuals from these groups. Many have made unfounded and unsubstantiated accusations of racism in zoning. Many made unsupported claims of economic growth and claims of no cost to the state or the communities. Many things were repeated, but just because you repeat something over and over in a coordinated effort does not make it true. Do we not strive to be transparent? We lock people down for a year, and as we are still locked down substantially, damaging legislation is being presented. Why don't we have a few town halls about this? Get out and talk to real people, your constituencies, not scripted testimony from well-organized groups with agendas. Not everyone can spend the 17 hours I spent during the last round of testimony to be heard. Many that endured 24 hours of grueling testimony did not get a chance to speak last week. The planners of this directive are attempting to force their will in order to cure inequalities. It is naive to believe that forcing one-size-fits-all zoning laws upon us will be the cure-all. There are also many other factors at play in our economy aside from zoning, including bad fiscal and policy decisions from state lawmakers. This is being proposed in the Constitution state. This flagrantly violates the constitutional rights of all Connecticut citizens. The Constitution does not say that we, the government, can force its citizens to comply with our vision of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness because we know what is best for them. Do not rush this bill or these bills. Educate people about it honestly. Let the opposition make its case in public. Let the supporters make their case in public. Let an informed electorate provide you with appropriate feedback before you pass this overreaching, state-mandated confiscation of zoning and property rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, and thank you for the time that you've spent and your persistence today. Representative Fiorello.
I'm here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Mr. Thompson. You said that you have gone to speak with your zoning this past weekend, and I wanted to ask you, are they finding this hard to understand, or what are you finding is their reaction? And how hard is it to explain the spate of zoning bills that you have now become aware of to your fellow citizens? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Thank you. Okay. The people I spoke with from zoning are angry. We've done a lot to make housing more affordable. We've had quite a few multi-family, larger buildings down in especially in our downtown area, where we're looking to build up the downtown area, but we're looking to do it in a way that maintains the character. And I don't know if that's a bad word anymore to say that the character of a community, but there's just not only the character, but we don't have water or sewer throughout most of the community. There's a lot of reasons why density does not make sense for our community. But it's also a choice for a lot of people. We don't want a extremely a Walgreens and a gas station and just a McDonald's and all these things down our main strip. We've got cows in our next to our downtown plot. So that's the way people want it. But we also are working on improving housing. But we're doing it on our own. We're doing it with the support of the community. And of course, not everybody's going to be happy in the local community, but it is progressing. As far as trying to explain it to people, it's very difficult. Some of the people just can't believe that it's being said. And of course, forwarding them the documentation, they just look at it and they shrug their shoulders. So I think that, for the average person, it's very difficult for them to get their arms around, and they want to trust their government. And again, the issue I have with this is that nobody is aware of this. I think that these groups just worked heavily on it, kind of kept it undercover, if you will, and now we're trying to pass it quickly through the state legislature. And I think we need to take a step back and make sure that everybody's aware of what this is about. I mean, transparency. I mean, it's lacking right now.
Okay, thank you so much. Do you think if we have one more hearing, your P&Z folks will be able to come on and testify? Do you feel like they have now been motivated to really understand these bills?
I'm working on it. It's some of them. It's hard for them to make the commitment to spend all day doing testimony. But I'm trying to get them to at least submit written testimony. So it's a work in progress. It's also something that I think the chairman. I like to get the chairman to make a statement rather than getting a lot of people individually, but I guess it doesn't matter one way or the other. I'm working on it to get their voices heard. But the first thing for them is just to try and wrap their arms around this. And the comments I've gotten from the few that have gotten back to me is that they are very, very alarmed. And I haven't spoken to the chairman directly, but the people that I've spoken to said the chairman was number one, unaware, and number two, very disturbed.
Well, I appreciate your comment that legislators should go on a roadshow or make, a more stronger effort to get information out and share about what it is that's being discussed in these various committees. But I also appreciate that you can see that it's up to citizens to also take an effort. It's kind of a two-way street, isn't it?
It is.
But
it is.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I do appreciate everyone here. I've got a really good appreciation for all that you do and the time that you put in. So the appreciation goes both ways. And I also would like to say that I've noticed in this hearing, at least, there's a lot more people coming out against it. And that's part of the issue that I have with the way this has been presented. It was a coordinated effort by organized groups to push an agenda, in my opinion. And now we're hearing a lot of people come out and say, whoa, this doesn't work for my community, or whoa, we're not a racist community. We don't enact zoning to promote racist policies. And as many have pointed out here, no one has provided any proof of racist zoning policies. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Fiorello. And before I recognize Representative Dubitsky, I do just want to mention, Mr. Thompson, I think you're right, not everyone's able to attend and participate in hearings, and we always encourage folks to reach out to their legislators too and make sure that they are aware. That's just another important step, which of course I know you're aware of, but I'm doing a little commercial for that as well. Okay. Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for coming out to talk to us. I appreciate that you recognize that this is really being pushed by a very organized group with an effort to essentially flood the zone, to rush this through in multiple committees, in multiple pieces, to make it very difficult for anybody to really get their arms around what is happening, how fast it's happening, how significant these changes are. And, even to just find all the bills that would affect zoning in the legislature, because they were spread out over so many committees. And it is, hopefully enough people are able to recognize this in time. All of these public hearings are happening very quickly on bills in multiple committees. Let me ask you, are you trying to follow the multiple bills in the multiple committees and attend some of the public hearings?
Principally, I've been trying to attend the zoning ones. This is the second one I've attended to. I've got 3 kids. I've got a daughter that's got an injured ankle. I've got to pick them up from school, take them back. I got to get my job done. My wife's picking up some extra hours. It is important to be an involved citizen, but it's difficult with the way things are being done now. And again, I do appreciate all the time that you are putting in, but the average citizen can't just put everything aside and do this. And to your, I made the point, you affirm it, that or you believe the same, that this is being rushed, and I think it's being rushed so that there's not an opportunity to really understand it. And I think an informed citizenry is crucial to our constitutional democracy, our constitutional form of government. So I object to the speed at which this legislation, which is sweeping, this is huge. This is a major revamp, and it completely takes away local input into zoning. You're basically making it every community follow the same rules. And in our community, to meet these targets, we'd have to have almost all affordable housing. And, that just doesn't fit our community. And as I mentioned, the last one, people are fleeing New York to come to a lower density community, and now we're trying to turn around and make it a higher density community. It just, I'm a CPA. My entire life, I've been about honesty and transparency, and I see right now this process is not transparent, and I think it's very difficult. Yes, I'm talking to people, and I'm trying to get other people to talk to people, but it's language that people have a difficult time with, and I think the opposition and the people supporting this should go and make a case to the public rather than trying to force it through a legislative marathon where there are numerous distractions and not good participation.
Well, frankly, in my personal opinion, I think that that's what the proponents and the authors of this are relying on, that people are just not able to spend the time to find all these bills and be able to address them. You know, there are zoning bills now in the Public Health Committee, Transportation Committee. You know, there are others as well that I can't think of off the top of my head, but they're all spread out because making it very difficult for anybody to keep track of where they are. In fact, over my strenuous objection, this committee sent 2 zoning bills to the Transportation Committee. I don't believe that either of those bills had anything whatsoever to do with transportation. They were strictly zoning bills, and we had that discussion on the record. So I very much appreciate your trying to do what you can, and appreciate the fact that it's difficult for a person with a job and commitments to try to keep track of the 3-card Monte that the legislature is doing with all these bills in order to try to push them through before anybody notices what's going on. I thank you for coming in and testify before us.
No, thank you as well, and I agree, and I consider myself above average. I'm not as up to speed as a lot of people on this that I've heard. I'm very impressed with their knowledge and so on, but I would say I'm definitely above average, and I'm having a hard time keeping up with it. So the average citizen, when I just look at them, they just look at me in disbelief. It's like, no, that can't be happening. So again, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Dubitsky. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Doug Thompson, I appreciate you the time that you have spent waiting to testify and coming out and sharing. As I listen to some of your concerns, a question I have for you is that are you more opposed to the process being rushed, or is it, or do you see some, or you're against the concern of the actual bill itself of affordable housing?
I'm against the bills themselves. I see it being a overreach and a mandate by the state to dictate to the communities, the local communities, how they should develop and how their zoning should be done. And I think it's misguided. I think the state has already done enough things to make our communities undesirable, and that is why people are leaving. I think if these zoning laws are passed, it's going to make it just that much more undesirable and make Connecticut a place that people don't want to be. So add to that the fact that it's being rushed and people don't understand it. It makes it nefarious in my opinion. I think this is a terrible legislation, and I am not happy with the way that it is being, as Mr. Binsey said, a 3-card Monte. Let's be open, honest, transparent about it. Let the people see the hand, what it means, and don't rush this. I mean, I don't know why there's, we've had local zoning for forever, and now there seems to be this god awful rush that we need to do this now. and that it will magically cure our ills. And as I said, there's more that goes into developing a community than zoning. And I do think that every time the legislature thinks they're going to solve a problem, they end up making more problems. And you know, again, I mentioned we're the constitutional state. You know, the Constitution state. The Constitution is we the people, not we the state will tell you how to run things. You know, I'm all for, you know, reasonable limitations and guidance, but I am not, you know, I totally resent the state feeling that they have the power to mandate how people are to use their personal property and the local communities.
Mhm. So in your community itself, do you have any affordable housing there, or would you say there was a need for some affordable, or you say there's enough?
We're looking to grow our community, and we've on Covey Road. You don't know my community, but on Covey Road there was I don't know how many units there are. I wish I had somebody from zoning here, but you know, probably a 60, 70 unit condo type of development, and we're a population of just about 10,000. We had apartments going in down by you know, our downtown area, and we just purchased some property so that we could the town did from a private developer so that we could control a development. We want to get people in the downtown area so that they could support our local businesses. So we are adamant that we do continue to make more affordable housing, but we also have to be leery of the limitations. Like 10 years ago, we just got a water line extended to our downtown area, but that's all it goes to, just the downtown area. So there's no water to the rest of the town. It's all water and sewer. So, you know, we do want to build, we do want to make more affordable housing, and we've done that in the last, you know, I think we've made great progress in the last several years. And there's many people in the community that want to see that. So it's not like we're sitting on our hands and we're trying to say, no, we want just, you know, mansions, if you will, even though there's not a lot of mansions in Burlington, but it's happening. And I think that if you allow the local community to do that, with the restrictions they have, we were also a watershed. We supply water to New Britain, Bristol, Hartford. So to force what works in another community on our community just isn't appropriate. And I think it's going to create another reason for people to see Connecticut as a place that is not hospitable.
So you would be in some sense happy to see a lot of communities govern themselves, guide themselves, plan their own affordable housing as opposed to more of a state mandate. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you know, if you wanted to provide incentives, okay, you know, I mean, I think there are already laws that promote that, but there is still a lot of local control. So I would say encouragement is a lot better than mandates.
Okay. Okay. So you would not be opposed to some sort of working group from a state level to sit down and give some guidance to different small towns, large towns, other municipalities.
That'd be fine.
Okay. Well, thank you, and I appreciate you once again for just, you know, being a part of this public hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Baker, and I appreciate your point about the working groups. And though this is not part of this public hearing, 6107 has just such a working group in it and is a bill that's been before this committee for 3 years. It was passed out of the House with bipartisan support 2 years ago and out of this committee last year with just 1 no vote. So I think there are a variety of proposals that are before us that some of the ideas have been before us for many years or in years past. Some of them are new. I appreciate your remarks, Mr. Thompson. I'm a person who is careful with words. And I think it's important. You talked about honesty and you used the word nefarious. And I want to just from a process standpoint, point out that one of the things that we did this session in this committee was to only hear raised bills, which means they're fully drafted in legislative language. It's a process that is completely proper, that committees can hear proposed bills which don't have that full legislative language. And I want to give a special shout out to our legislative nonpartisan attorneys who have drafted those bills so that we could be sure to have public input. A lot of times concepts and ideas come before committees, and as in the case of the bill that I referenced, it sometimes is years before we get there. But this is the best way we have to be able to hear that input. I think there's never enough opportunity, I think, to hear all the input that we would like to hear, as we saw last week. But I just did want to point that out and very much appreciate the time that you have spent. You're absolutely right. It's not possible for all folks to participate in this way. And I think that is why we do have some of those organizations and even lobbyists who help to do that. But I am so grateful, and again, would encourage you to encourage those in your community to reach out to your local representative, but also to send emails. We, as members of the committee, do receive the direct emails as well that people send in to us. And I'm so grateful for your feedback and time today. Thank you. Next, Mr. Clerk, I believe we have Anna Saris.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
That was Rep. Lamar, but yeah, it is Miss Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Miss Saris, to be followed by Liz Tomasino.
Yep.
Miss Saris, are you here in the Zoom? Oh, there we go. Miss Saris, welcome. Yes, welcome, and please proceed.
Hi, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Basically, you know, we've been living in Connecticut for over 25 years now. We live in Greenwich. We've come from very humble beginnings and worked very hard to decide to raise a family here. We really enjoy the community. What we like about the community is its local government and its local controls. What we've seen, what I've noticed in the past over a decade, is the state imposing unfunded mandates on local communities. And all these unfunded mandates at the end of the day cost a lot of money and actually make very little, move the needle very little. So they don't accomplish what they're set out to do. They're very disruptive. The policy is dictating behavior. The policy is not really aligned with the outcome and the end result behavior, and it's just stagnating. And so people are fed up and people are leaving. So the last thing we need is the state coming into local communities and imposing, you know, some larger views when our local communities can take care of ourselves. And Greenwich and other communities in Fairfield County are some of the most generous communities in the world. We embrace our diversity, we embrace our community. We're blind to anything, but what we are is focused on working hard and giving back. So again, I think the state not understanding the local communities, not understanding the local politics, and getting into everybody's business and blowing up budgets is just not the way to run a state. So I believe we need to go back to the drawing board, leave affordable housing issues at the local community level, and stop imposing these unfunded mandates with no results. And we need to lower taxes. So people stay here. I mean, bring in more business. It's not going to happen that way. So I'm pushing it back on you. We've been here a long time, and the state has only gone down. And as Fred Camillo said earlier, this is a beautiful state. We are close to Boston. We are close to New York City. We are close to New England. There is no reason why this state isn't one of the best run, most desirable states for people to come to. And what is happening? People are leaving. Why are people leaving? Because the government is not run efficiently. So I put it back to you to go and fix your own books and decide what you're going to do, and let us work hard and pay the taxes that we're supposed to pay. We're paying enough taxes as it is, and we want to control our own local communities. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Saris. Representative Fiorello.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So nice to meet you, Anna. I also remember when I moved from New York to Greenwich or to Connecticut, I couldn't believe that there's no county government. And I was like, how amazing. I can walk into town hall, or I can join the RTM or be elected to it. And our town takes care of so much of our own business. It's really a very unique and wonderful thing about living in Connecticut. I just wanted to thank you for your testimony, and also ask you sort of what your background is. You're very clear in saying that the micromanaging is inefficient. And I just want to know, are you a business owner, or maybe just a mom is all the credibility we need? But I just want to understand sort of the perspective you're coming from, if you could share a bit more.
Is a small business owner here in town, so he works very hard and he employs people. I happen to be a business consultant, and I work in New York City. So I've been involved in local government actually for quite some time now in the past, and it's really frustrating. What really turns me off is let's meet to meet and not accomplish anything. And we know what our problems are. So what we need is some real decision makers to address the problems and come up with solutions for those problems. And again, don't want to keep rehashing, but having the state come into local communities and tell us what to do is just not the best use of their time.
I appreciate that too. And given that you have a business background, I think you also understand that it's all about comps, isn't it? I mean, compare ourselves to the other states and how attractive are we? And I really appreciate what you're saying about our beautiful and amazing location. And you can't make it up. We are placed so fantastically, and we really should be a state that's thriving. Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Fiorello. And thank you, Ms. Saris, for being here with us today and for the time that you spent with the committee. Before we go on to our next speaker, which will be Liz Tomasino, I would like to recognize Representative Winkler.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to apologize. Discrimination against Asian Americans is very real, and I never meant to indicate otherwise. My apologies to all of offended. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. I'm going to go next to the next two speakers will be Liz Tomasino, and to be followed by Betsy Guerra.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the members of the Planning and Development Committee for allowing me to testify. My name is Elizabeth D. Tomasino, and I'm from Greenwich. I would like you to consider my opposition to 1068. First, I want to speak about affordability. Many people in Greenwich from all walks of life have sacrificed, saved, and worked hard to afford to live in Greenwich. Even Ms. Saris recently just attested to that. Anyone who can afford to do so can, regardless of race. For generations now, Greenwich has been the beneficiary of its close proximity to the high-paying jobs in New York City. This is especially evident during COVID as folks flee New York. Greenwich, being the first town across the border, has seen our real estate prices recover and even soar. Affordability has as much to do with jobs and income. Land in Greenwich is very expensive. which has made it very hard for our town to reach the 10% government mandated affordable housing quota. Many towns with expensive land prices have struggled. Something that the legislature must study and understand better is, what do we mean by our goals for, quote, affordable housing? For housing to be considered affordable, it must have been constructed after 1990. Yet there are tens of thousands of families who live in homes built in the 1700s and the 1800s. Moreover, housing is not determined by whether the rent is affordable or not, but whether the property is subject to a deed restriction to prevent its rent from ever rising above affordable levels in the future. Deed restrictions sound good, but aren't we helping people get into homes and then limiting their ability to grow a nest egg for later use, like for college or retirement? It seems to me that to form a coherent policy on affordable housing, the state of Connecticut needs to have accurate and complete data, which it clearly doesn't as of now. Why should residents of any town be punished with taxation for living in a town where they can afford? And why does the state of Connecticut believe they can tax residences using the current artificial measurements about affordable housing? By many measures, our state is just not affordable. Businesses cannot afford to expand, to grow, or to hire more people under all the regulations and taxes that are imposed. Our nonprofits cannot afford to all the good work they need to do when their donor base is fleeing the state. Our elderly people cannot afford to retire and stay in Connecticut. Our young people cannot afford to live in a place with few jobs and no thriving cities, which is where young people want to be. I strongly urge this legislature to reject any new taxes like 1068 that will only make our state that much more unaffordable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tomasino. Representative Fiorello.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So great to see you, Liz. I wanted to ask you, have you testified before, or was this your first time?
First time. I'm a little testifying virgin.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad you did. I kind of wanted to understand, because we had a testimony earlier of someone saying that it has been hard for regular citizens to get the information, understand what their government is up to. And you have come to testify on a new, property tax based on affordable housing. These could be sort of, deals that topics we don't regularly hear about. How did you learn about this, and what has motivated you to come and wait hours and hours to testify and even prepare comments?
Thank you, Representative Fiorello. I actually have not, I've only lived in Greenwich for about 10 years, and I just started in the last couple of years starting to get a better understanding of local and state politics. And one of the ways I've learned about what is going on actually is all the emails that you send to us about what is happening, seriously, about what is happening, and get involved and encouraging your constituents to speak out and understand what's happening, and you educate us. And I want to thank you so much, because it's been extremely helpful for me, and I know I speak for many, many other residents of Greenwich.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I know you're really involved a lot in the town, and you mentioned that nonprofits are suffering too. I wanted to give you a chance to sort of share about how all these towns do have individuals like yourself who are solving problems. And you spoke about wanting solutions at the local level and not the state coming in with instructions, and definitely not punitive taxes. Why do you have faith that local folks can solve it, and not state level directions could solve our issues with affordable housing?
So I have a lot of faith in our town leaders at Town Hall, Fred Camillo, Lauren Rayburn, Jill Obermeyer, and, Overland, I'm sorry. And
Overlander.
Overlander, yes. I'm exhausted. I've got a little jet lag from coming home from California yesterday, so pardon me. At any rate, I have a lot of faith in them. They have been really creative in terms of just trying to look outside the box to think of different ways to come up with solutions to all kinds of different problems and I should say challenges that we have in our town. I also will tell you, I'm going to touch base on what you said about nonprofits, because I mentioned it. You know, as a member of the Junior League of Greenwich, I have seen our membership dwindle, in part because we're not able to meet in person, and that's just because of COVID. And that's very difficult for a lot of people to get behind. And so they're trying to be creative in terms of having fundraisers so that they can, raise money to give back to organizations like Kids in Crisis and Neighbor to Neighbor and other great organizations that are nonprofits here in the town of Greenwich. I am also starting a business, an events and marketing business, where my initial focus will be to do community events, or I should say events for the community, and help to drive business to the local merchants, as well as hopefully tag a nonprofit at events and help them raise some money so they can do the good that they do.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. Madam Chair, if I may, through you, I wanted to make a comment to Rep. Winkler.
Please proceed.
I certainly don't speak for all Asians, but as one Asian myself, I want to say thank you for your apology. I certainly appreciate your coming back on that. And I think nobody wants these kinds of hurtful conversations. And the hurtful part is for us to keep seeing each other based on race. And I really hope it's not that we are race blind, it's that you see through it and see more to who's there. So thank you so much. And I do appreciate congeniality, and I look forward to a time when we can all be in a room together. So thank you, Winkler, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Fiorello. I do think that the opportunity to be together, to connect with one another and to get to know one another will be a tremendous gift for us. Thank goodness for the vaccine and all those who have helped to get shots in arms so that we can do so. So thank you. And thank you, Ms. Tomasino, for being here with us today. With that, we'll go to Betsy Guerra. Ms. Guerra, you are a trooper from last week to this, and hopefully we're going to get you some better luck with our lottery numbers in the future. But Ms. Guerra.
This is why I don't gamble. But anyway, thank you. My name is Betsy Guerra. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Council of Small Towns, and I've submitted testimony on a wide range of bills. I'm just going to touch briefly on a couple. First, House Bill 6448, expanding access to local government and modernizing local government operations. I have to commend the governor's office and OPM because they have been with COST and our municipal leaders every step of the way through this pandemic. And we truly appreciate their efforts because they have helped address a number of concerns that municipalities needed to address in order to deliver critical service and continue to operate. One of those issues was allowing towns to hold remote or hybrid remote in-person meetings. And that has been absolutely critical in making sure that we could adopt local budgets, hold hearings, move forward with critical fiscal matters, et cetera. And so we do support the intent of the bill. We do have concerns, and we are working through those with the governor's office. We are concerned about mandating that all meetings be held remotely at this point. And I think it was touched on earlier today that just given the sheer number of municipal boards, commissions, committees, subcommittees, et cetera, that it may be very costly or impractical to have all of those meetings be held remotely. For example, some people do building committees or zoning committees may do site walks, and how do you accommodate that? Others meet in basements or the corners of libraries and may not have sufficient access. So again, we are working through that, but at this point we are concerned about the mandated approach under the bill. I also want to touch on House Bill 6644, an act concerning a study of property tax reform issues. Cost opposes the bill, and we oppose it because as drafted, it does not consider the fact that unless the state has a firm commitment to fully funding critical sources of municipal aid like ECS, special education, unless they commit to eliminating unfunded mandates such as the minimum budget requirement, and unless they provide us with an alternative, reliable source of revenue, a property tax cap is just going to result in cuts to services. Towns, and I know we have a lot of former first selectmen and mayors on this committee, they work very hard to control property tax levels in their communities. But unfortunately, given the increasing costs associated with some of the delivering these services, it's very hard sometimes to come in without increasing the budget. I also want to point out that we already have on the books a municipal spending cap, which is a very similar type of mechanism. And recognizing that in a state that is as reliant on property tax revenues as Connecticut to fund critical services, what the state did was also enact the municipal revenue sharing account to provide a portion of the sales tax revenue so that it could reduce towns' reliance on property taxes and ensure that they wouldn't exceed the spending cap. However, those funds were swept. The program's been largely suspended, but we're still left with the cap. And I also want to be on record in opposing Senate Bill 1068, which would, in addition to putting a tremendous burden on already overburdened local property taxpayers, also subject or fails to recognize that many small towns are unable to achieve the 10% affordable housing threshold for a lot of reasons that you've heard throughout the day and in previous hearings.
Your 3 minutes are up.
Extremely difficult given wastewater, water issues, land use conditions, etc. So thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Ms. Guerra, thank you. Your persistence and patience is much appreciated. Having you here with us is a benefit to us. Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, and thank you, Betsy, for coming in. Since you represent the small towns, and it appeared obvious to me you were not finished with your testimony, I'd like to give you an opportunity to comment on anything that you were not able to squeeze into 3 minutes.
I appreciate that, Representative Dubitsky, and I also appreciate all the time that you've all taken during this legislative process on these hearings, because unbelievable the commitment to holding these hearings. I think that I kind of finished my statement, and just that we do have concerns in general with the 10% affordable housing threshold. And I think tying it to a property tax assessment in this instance is just patently unfair. It doesn't reflect that towns in some areas of the state struggle to be able to develop affordable housing because they are trying to address wastewater issues. They lack public water supplies, public sewers, and they also may have a lot of land that is environmentally sensitive, protected by conservation easements. And so I think we do need to take a look at that threshold and see, perhaps it works for purposes of the Affordable Housing Appeals Act. That's a different discussion, but it certainly doesn't work across the board. And I think we need to look at developing a more realistic affordable housing goal that actually reflects the incremental progress that towns are making to meet the affordable housing needs.
Right. Well, I think that because the state has so much power and can basically move chess pieces around the board so easily, it may come as a surprise to many people that there are municipalities that their town governments simply don't have the power and ability to do certain things and to make certain things happen. Because you know, many of them are run by mostly volunteers with very small paid staff, very small budgets. And let me ask you this, do you have any idea what percentage of your members are able to reach the 10% threshold?
I could get you that data because there is a list that's published each year by the Department of Housing indicating which towns have met the 10% affordable housing threshold. But I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay. Good.
But honestly, the list is very long. So I would.
Very long with regard to towns that have.
With regard to towns that have not been able to meet that threshold.
Well, frankly, I don't know any small town that does. I don't know any one. You know, most of the towns that I've seen on the list are all the larger municipalities and the more organized cities that have paid staff and a more powerful local governments. Do you know of any small town, any town that's under, say, 7,500 or 5,000 people that is able to meet that?
I don't know of any. I mean, I'd be happy to confirm that by looking at the data. It's very easily accessible. But I think the good news here is that we're having a lot of conversations in our communities about the need to promote more affordable housing. And I think that's been very productive. We have currently a requirement that towns develop an affordable housing plan, which is required in the spring of 2022. The councils of government, consultants have been working with the towns to ensure that they meet that deadline. I'm hopeful that they will. We're having, in fact, I just had a meeting earlier today to discuss House Bill 6107 with some of the housing advocates. And I think that it is an important activity that towns are undertaking. So we're going to talk more about that in the future. We plan on holding a webinar in May with the partnership to promote efforts to develop the housing plans in a way that is meaningful and that will actually help towns figure out how they can move forward with addressing affordable housing in a way that takes into consideration local land use conditions, water and sewer, et cetera, and other issues that they face.
Well, thank you for that. Now, there over the last in this hearing and over the last several hearings, we've all heard much criticism about the definition of the statutory definition of affordable housing. Much of that criticism coming from me and other members who represent smaller towns. Is there anything that you and your organization are considering that we might be able to learn from with regard to changing the statutory definition of affordable housing?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we have supported, and there was a bill earlier this year in the Housing Committee, which unfortunately did not move forward, was a bill that would also include in the definition of what counts towards affordable housing for purposes of the threshold, naturally occurring affordable housing, things that units that aren't necessarily subject to deed restriction or that have not been financed under the Connecticut Housing and Financing Authority, but are certainly considered affordable. So we do think that that's important. And I do mean to look back and see when towns are doing their assessments as part of the affordable housing plan, whether they're including questions about naturally occurring affordable housing, because I think that's a big consideration. The other issue is that I think we do need to recognize, and I know that there have been a couple towns that have done the math for me, and they look at the number of buildable lots they have in their community, and they look at areas where they are prohibited from building any type of housing, whether it's affordable or any other type of development, and it just doesn't work. That if they used every available lot to place affordable housing on it, they would still not achieve that 10% threshold. So clearly there's an issue with it. And now that affordable housing threshold was enacted when they adopted the Affordable Housing Appeals Act. I don't know if anyone's ever looked to see whether or not it is still a viable goal. I know that there's been efforts, and there is a there have been changes to provide towns with a moratorium from the Affordable Housing Appeals Act because they recognize that it's a fairly difficult threshold to meet. But I don't think we've had a really meaningful conversation about how we can make it more workable. Why is a 10% threshold across the board? Why does that make sense when we recognize the diversity of our communities in terms of geography and location and demand?
Right. Well, in addition to naturally occurring affordable housing, which I think is the large majority of the affordable housing in my area, much of the housing in my area is likely considered affordable, except for that it doesn't meet the actual statutory definition. We've also, as I've discussed with other people, we allow people to have accessory apartments outside of the main structure. So over a garage and a barn, a new building, things like that. And under the statutory definition, those wouldn't count at all. So I do think that we need a real good look and redo of that definition. And I would very much appreciate it if cost, which represents the small towns, would be involved in that.
We would very much like to be involved in that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate you coming out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Dubitsky. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Ms. Guerra. I'm going to ask you a question unrelated to zoning first by getting your thoughts on 6644. And you couldn't be more profound than starting with George Santayana on the quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." I don't know, relative to your testimony, why do you oppose this from a standpoint of the past practices of the state? You cited ECS formula, you cited, pilot, you cited unfunded mandates and providing municipalities with alternative resource revenue. Are you saying that even with the current statement of a no budget deficit, that your municipalities don't trust that the state will deliver on the promised money?
Well, that is something that has come up from time to time. And I know my testimony was a little cheeky in that regard, but it has been a source of frustration. And I think that the bill itself suggests that towns aren't interested in controlling property tax levels, which from my experience can be farther from the truth. They work very hard to try to control spending, but it is very difficult. You can't reduce education spending by a significant amount because of the minimum budget requirement. You don't know because of the caps on special education funding and the education cost sharing formula, which hasn't been fully funded. How are towns, if they can't rely on the property tax revenues, how are they supposed to fund those services? And so I did start with that quote because I felt like a sense of deja vu when I was drafting the testimony that we've had this discussion. And we do support efforts to reduce reliance on the property tax. That's absolutely critical. I mean, I think the property tax, everybody complains about it. And they should, because it's very high, because unfortunately, we're too dependent on the property tax to fund critical services. But unfortunately, the state did provide an alternative source of revenue, and it was considered a landmark approach under the Municipal Revenue Sharing Act. However, those funds were rated to address budget deficits. And, I don't fault the state. I know that they needed to address the budget deficits, but it still puts us in a difficult position because we still have that municipal spending cap in place, which suggests that if a town increases its budget by 2.5%, that it should somehow be penalized. Well, the penalty on the books is that you lose your MRS, the MRSA grant, or 50 cents on every dollar that you get under the grant. But since there's no funding for the program, it doesn't really make much of a difference. But it just speaks to the fact that unless we are really going to commit to fully funding municipal aid, at least some of those big major sources of municipal aid, and unless we address unfunded mandates and give towns the tools to really reduce spending and provide them with some kind of alternative revenue source, there's really no way that we can expect that a town is not going to exceed the property tax cap that is suggested under the bill. And actually, the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations looks at the municipal budget adoption experience every year, and it indicates the number of towns that have actually exceeded either 2% increase or 2.5% increase. And it's interesting data, but a lot of towns, if they end up having a infrastructure project that has been approved by the voters at referendum, may end up exceeding that. If they end up losing municipal aid or their grand list is reduced, they may end up having to exceed the 2 or 2.5% cap. So it's hard to hamstring a town like that. I think they need the flexibility. And I think it's important to point out, these are budgets in our small towns, at any rate, by and large, are either approved at a town meeting or approved at referendum. And so the voters have the opportunity to comment and to vote up or down on the budget. So it really does reflect the will of the people in terms of their priorities for their community.
I appreciate that. And it's amazing that you cited in fiscal year 2018 and 2019, 73 of the 169 municipalities increased their local budget by 2% or more. And was it a result of money not coming in from the state because of our budgetary challenges?
I think that's certainly part of it, but education spending does tend to be the cost driver in a local budget, and it increases every year, but yet most of the smaller towns have either seen a reduction in education cost sharing funding or special education funding or flat funding, and it's been flat funded for a number of years, and it's tough.
Well, that's one of the challenges we have is, and this is a question that I've been waiting to ask, is the point that we're so fortunate right now to get COVID federal money. And there's been allocations for one of the biggest cost drivers, you say, education. But there's also significant allocation that's afforded to the governor to be able to selectively dole out the federal money. A lot of municipalities and many of your members will benefit from this, but there's a cliff to that. There's an end of that largesse of federal money. What happens when your budget is dependent on that cash flow, and we've been readily availing it to you from the state side? Then all of a sudden, when the federal stops funding and the COVID relief dries up, what do you then do as a town? Your costs aren't going down with the mandates we give you.
That's an important question. We've actually started to have conversations about that with our members and with the councils of government. I know Francis Pickering from Westcott called me earlier today to talk about it. We are we've been waiting for the guidance from the U.S. Treasury. We've been reaching out to our congressional delegation to get information on this. But that's an important question. I don't have an answer for you, but it is a concern that if that money is allowed to be used, for example, to reduce property taxes in the short term, what do we do next year when we don't have that federal funding coming in? So we have to make sure that we do this in a way that isn't going to create some of those spikes or cliffs that end up wreaking havoc on the local communities.
Because we have a COVID challenge, but we've made no structural changes in how we govern. In fact, we've added to layers of complexity and costs that have been buffeted by this. What people have forgotten is the fact that even though we don't have a deficit because of the COVID money, this state had a structural deficit of nearly $1.8 billion going in this fiscal cycle. So we really need to sound the alarm. And I know many of your small towns operate very efficiently, very grassroots with your constituents and your local representation. So I know you're aware of it. And I just wish that we could sound the alarm for many of us that are not feeling the pain as necessary. Just ask local businesses, ask people who may be impacted. That is very real. So I want to thank you for your testimony on this issue and an opportunity to talk more about it, to make sure that your towns are protected, whatever result comes to be. But I couldn't leave you without asking you about 1068, and the idea that many of your small towns may not have the pressure of A30G builders coming in and changing the complexion of the towns, because there may be smaller, some rural areas. But what is this idea that even if you don't meet the moratorium, but you don't have the building pressure of A30G, of a mansion tax of the 2 mil onto
Right.
your properties, it beyond the property taxes that you pay and the income tax that you pay, this idea of the double whammy, I called it, of state mandates in regards to affordable housing and a statewide property tax really is one of the frustrating points that I've been trying to wrap my head around.
Well, we would agree. The bill is very misguided. It, the discussion about imposing any additional assessment on property taxpayers at this point is a non-starter for us. It just would impose a tremendous burden on local property taxpayers that are already overburdened. And it doesn't make sense when you tie it to a definition of affordable housing that isn't achievable for many of our communities because of various issues that they face, such as lack of public water, sewer, other kinds of land use conditions that make it difficult to address those issues. So, Cost is very much opposed to the bill. I'm comforted by the fact that I've heard that the governor does not intend to support it at all and that it's not going to go anywhere, but it is a concern that it's out there because it raises a lot of concern for property taxpayers that, we're in a really difficult time. People are struggling, and the last thing they want to hear is, oh, there's going to be a new tax on your home, and that's going to end up impacting, your home value over time. And it's doesn't do anything to really address the issues that we should be focused on now, is that is how we guide our communities through the pandemic and position them for social and economic recovery.
And many of the small towns have enjoyed a renaissance and a resurgence with a lot of the urban residents moving into your communities. So you've had a burst of real estate boom, as we heard from some of the first selectmen in northeastern Connecticut and obviously in southwestern Connecticut. But it's short-lived. And obviously the idea of a statewide, or the possibility of statewide property taxes in addition to your local property taxes and income tax has got to be a huge disincentive when you're competing with other neighboring communities and states to try to recruit new residents that are going to set their roots down.
I would agree with that. It does create a lot of tension in our communities, and I think that it really frustrates people because many of these people believe that they pay a significant portion of their income taxes and their other taxes to the state, and they don't get very much back in services. They don't get much back in municipal aid. And so people in those communities are kind of at a tipping point. And you do hear discussions about, well, I can't afford to retire in Connecticut or keep my house in Connecticut. I need to look to move elsewhere. And I think that's unfortunate. So we have to be very mindful of the property tax burden that we place on homeowners and ensure that we try to take steps to reduce the reliance on the property tax in a constructive way.
No, I appreciate that. And I know the hour's long, but I want to take a moment to thank you and all of your members for your work. Cost really represents, and I know how actively you are engaged with your municipal leaders. You're really representing their interest as an organization and not swayed by some of the hierarchical influences that may befall other constituency representative organizations. So I want to commend you and all of your members, and thank you for your leadership, Betsy. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Representative Winkler.
Yes, thank you for your testimony. You don't have to answer this, but have I seen your name at the near the bottom, or actually at the bottom of several of our speaker lists?
Not the bottom. I think I'm in the middle here. I know.
Yeah.
In environment, I spoke the other day. It was a little after midnight. In this committee, it was probably 1:30 in the morning. And I have to apologize because I think I misheard a question that you posed because I turned the volume down so that I wouldn't wake my husband and my dog. And I'm also a little hard of hearing at this point in life. So if I did mean to follow up with you and fully respond to your questions. So I will do that during the day someday.
Okay. Your ability to hang in there is impressive. So you're opposed to us enabling towns to give a 3% interest rate for 3 months on unpaid property tax bills?
Those are always tough issues. And, so throughout the pandemic, we did work with the governor's office and OPM to ensure that we could provide property taxpayers with either a deferral or a lower interest rate or both, recognizing that people were struggling. I think going forward, we are concerned, and we've been on the record for many years, concerned about lowering the interest rate because it has been an effective tool to encourage people to pay their bills on time, and it ends up making it difficult, particularly if you have a provision if the interest rate provisions aren't uniform across the state. It is our understanding that it makes tax collection a little more difficult and challenging. And the couple of the bills not only impact the collection of property taxes, but also water and sewer taxes. And so there is a concern.
Do you believe that with money being available at 3% now, do you believe that 18% interest is a burden on property taxpayers?
Fortunately, for most of our small towns, we have excellent collection rates. So there's very few that are actually subject to the delinquent interest rate. Yeah, I'm not going to defend an 18% interest rate. It is high. Again, I think what we're concerned about is how do we set an interest rate that's going to be an effective tool to encourage people to pay on time? And how do we ensure that it's uniformly applied and not just subject to, one town has one interest rate and the others has a different one, because that makes it difficult. So we're certainly willing to talk about those issues. I would definitely need to discuss with our tax collectors because they're in a better position to kind of know how the interest rates have affected collections and in their communities. But we would certainly be interested in discussing this. And again, we're very sympathetic to the concerns of our property taxpayers during this time. It's just been very challenging.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. Ms. Guerra, I just wanted to follow up with you a little bit about the provisions around electronic access to meetings. And you clearly heard some of the conversation that was happening earlier today. I think this is an issue that we are going to continue to be grappling with from this day forward, because we've seen that we have the capacity to do things that we certainly didn't think we could do because we've had to do them. But there have been a lot of valid points raised. I think, I would just comment that I'd like to continue to work with you, as I said, to CCM, with the governor's office, to contemplate some of the issues, how we can address them in this session and in future sessions. I do think it might make sense to have a working group, not that it necessarily needs to come in statute, but to have a group who gathers to continue to talk about these issues as we find out, what it means in practice going forward. One of the things I said to CCM, and I would relay this to you also, is that I do think that one very helpful use of the relief funds that are coming from the federal government would be in this area to help retrofit. I know my own community here in Fairfield, they were doing some of that. I think that's probably, just something that our communities probably need to anticipate. So the question I would have for you is, are you finding that communities are anticipating this, and what kinds of conversations are they having already?
And just to clarify, anticipating additional federal funding to help them address that, or anticipating continuing to hold remote and hybrid remote meetings?
Anticipating the logistics and figuring out what they need to do in order to be able to hold those hybrid and remote electronic meetings.
Yes, and I should point out, we do hope that there is something that is done very soon, because the executive orders are scheduled to expire unless they're continued by the legislature or by the governor. And our towns are relying on the ability to continue to hold remote meetings or hybrid remote meetings to facilitate town meetings, budget hearings, et cetera. So, we're absolutely supportive of efforts to continue those conversations. And I think it makes a lot of sense when you're talking about requiring the electronic meetings for purposes of a town meeting or a board of selectmen meeting or board of finance meeting, board of ed. But it's when you drill down to those smaller subcommittees and boards and commissions where the public has probably never bothered or been interested in participating in a meeting, is where it becomes difficult. And I think I heard you mention that you'd meet downstairs in a basement somewhere where there wasn't connectivity, and that happens all the time, where people are, they're in a meeting and they pulled the chairs to each corner of the library, and they're breaking into subcommittee meetings. It happens a lot. So I think we need to get a better handle on kind of what their experience has been. A lot of those meetings may not have been occurring during the pandemic, even remotely, because they're just not as time sensitive as some of the board of selectmen or board of finance meetings. But I think we definitely want to be participating in any conversation about that. I do think all of our towns have mentioned that it's been great to give people the opportunity to participate, to listen in. People have been respectful and they've been engaged, and that's a very positive outcome. We have had discussions also with the Freedom of Information Commission to make sure that we address certain issues so that there are no issues that may pose an inadvertent violation for a town for failure to, for example, state their name before they speak each and every time. And, again, we're working through those. We've actually gotten through a lot of those issues. I just don't know. I think the mandated approach is the one thing that we have concerns about.
And I appreciate that. I might slightly disagree with one of your comments, just that people may not be interested. And I find here in Fairfield, I'll use the ever famous Parks and Recreation Commission, right? Or even some of our Sustainable Fairfield, or some, there are lots of different bodies that people may want to have access to. And I think that's part of what the bill gets at. But I'm aware that there are logistics that we're going to have to figure out. I think what I'm saying is we are going to need to figure out those logistics, because we do need to provide that access, and we do need to think about it going forward. So I would encourage all the communities out there probably none of whom are listening right now because we've been here for almost 12 hours, but to be thinking in that direction in terms of the future, and that hopefully we can work together here at the state level and with you and CCM and others to work through those issues. But I'm
happy to do that. It's been very productive conversations that we've had, and it's an important issue.
Yes, indeed. And I concur with Rep. Winkler in that you really are a trooper in terms of staying with us, and apparently with other committees as well. We are seeing, as we've said before, we're seeing increased participation in numbers and time because of this electronic access that we have. Not that I prefer it. I do prefer being in person. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a very quick follow-up, Ms. Gar, with respect to the interest rate. So I had asked a couple of questions earlier this year of, I don't remember, to be honest with you, whether it was the Office of Legal Research or Fiscal Analysis, but I had asked a couple of questions about the interest rate on the municipal level. And they were able to do an estimate based off of fiscal year 19. And I guess you would think that, you know, they sampled data from 20 municipalities. So obviously it's, you know, I don't know which municipalities, but it is what it is. It was the answer I got. And they found that the average interest revenue comprised about 0.61% of the total property tax, which I think on its face sounds like a pretty de minimis number. But that's also based off of a total property tax revenue to all municipalities of $11.2 billion, which means it worked out to roughly the interest on delinquent property taxes totaled nearly $68 million in fiscal 2019, which, you know, even spread across 169 towns, obviously not evenly, is a pretty hefty sum of money. So it's encouraging to me to hear you say that cost would be willing also to take a look at the interest rate that gets charged on property taxes at the municipal level, because when you look at that number, it does seem like that's a pretty hefty burden for people who are trying to pay their taxes and have fallen behind. And it starts to dig a hole that gets pretty deep for people that over time is only going to get worse unless they hit the lottery or come into inheritance or get lucky. So thank you for your openness to look into this issue further. I hope that moving forward, you know, some decision can be made where it might be possible to bring that interest rate down. Thank you.
And I think we, you know, that's an interesting number. I'll have to look into that. But I think we need to also look at the extent to which the towns have relied on those interest payments as part of their budget, whether they include them in their budget, in their revenue estimates.
That's a good point. I know that I've spoken to only one or two, but I also sort of heard anecdotally through them that a number of, I couldn't say whether it's everybody, that a number of municipalities do budget a number into their planning for interest collections, which I think is a kind of a sad state of affairs, to be honest with you. I recognize the necessity because it's a reality of their jobs and of our, you know, our municipal finance every year, but it is a little bit unfortunate whether it's a town where it's a number in the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands. It's unfortunate that we have to be planning for the fact that people are going to be falling behind and paying those hefty interest rates. So thank you again for your willingness to work towards a solution that will balance the need to have a good, you know, incentive for people to pay in a timely fashion, but not break people's backs and drive them out of their homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Smith. I was calling you Representative Guerra because you spent so much time with us.
Oh, no, not going to happen.
Ms. Guerra, I want to thank you so much for being with us, and I look forward to working with you on a number of bills throughout the rest of the session. I hope you get some good rest tonight.
I will. Thank you, Representative, and thank you all for all you do. Much appreciated. Good night.
Next on our list, we have Robert Lafrance to be followed by Paula Perlman. Mr. Lafrance, are you here? There you are.
I am here, and I'm very grateful to be following Betsy Guerra. She's a professional who I've had the pleasure of working with for years at the General Assembly. And you guys are very fortunate to have her expertise this evening as you go through some of these complicated issues. Good evening, folks. My name is Robert Lafrance. I'm the Director of Policy for Audubon, Connecticut. We're the state office of the National Audubon Society, and I appreciate Senator Cassano, Co-Chair McCarthy Vahey, Ranking Member Huang and Zullo, as well as Vice Chairs Needleman and Gupel for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm here to speak in favor of House Bill number 6642. I don't know that a lot of folks have spoken about it today. This is an act concerning the study of access to municipal-owned beaches and parks adjacent to marine and tidal waters. I think as folks know, the COVID experience has done something to folks who like the outdoors. It really but got people to reconnect with nature. But at the same time it did that, we were forced to be separated from each other. So what we found, and if folks can see behind me, this is our facility at Stratford Point, Connecticut. We had a number of folks who weren't able to visit state parks because of limitations and restrictions that they had. So they started to move to other places along the shoreline to be able to visit and do the things they wanted to do, particularly commune with nature and be in a place where they could actually enjoy the great outdoors and have the opportunity to do that. At Stratford Point, many of the folks who come there come there to watch birds, but we also have people who come to take a look at the marine life in terms of these, as you see behind me, we have these reef balls that people come and take a look at. The reason I'm testifying in favor of this approach, I do believe it's time for a frank conversation led by OPM and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection about how we access our municipal parks and beaches that are along the coast. I believe firmly that folks who have the experience of being in and around Long Island Sound and our tidal areas become the constituents who actually advocate for its protection. And as we start to look at climate change, we're going to need as many advocates as we can have, as many constituents as we have to help support these very important areas for both birds, fish, and all other types of recreational and outdoor activities, as well as the significant benefits that these areas can give to us when it comes to climate change. I believe that the approach that we're talking about is something that's needed, that we have the opportunity to sit down with folks. I'm going to speak a little bit to the GC3 process. The Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Governor's Council spent a fair amount of time working through the issues having to do with resiliency, as well as adaptation. I believe that both through federal money and through some of the money that we're going to be looking at to deal with climate adaptation, we create a perfect opportunity to have a dialogue about how we access municipal beaches and tidal areas. I would say also that the state of Connecticut has done that through the Passport to Parks program. And as a result of that, we've had folks be able to use our state parks on a more frequent basis. I think it demonstrates the ability of everybody to want to be able to experience nature, and I support this bill for those purposes. Happy to answer any questions if I can.
Thank you, Mr. Lafrance. I would say thank you also for sticking with us, for everyone who's still here with us this evening. I see Representative Hennessy. Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Robert. It's nice to see you.
Great to see you, Jack Hennessy. Great to see you.
I believe that this bill originally was not a study. Could you speak on that?
So two things. Representative Lamar put forward, and I did submit written testimony on this, and Representative Lamar did in fact put in a proposed bill looking to try and get more action than just a study. The notion, and actually, believe it or not, that the agency the DEEP had put forward a proposal as well. I don't know if folks are familiar, but there was an important case a number of years ago, Layden versus the town of Greenwich. And this was a case that basically talked about how people access and how people are able to access different municipal parks along the coast. So both Representative Lamar as well as the agency's proposal has started to sort of focus on, can we codify that in a better way? I think the agency's language talked about something that they had thought to propose, in essence, to try and maximum limit that you could only charge 50% more than what a resident might be able to be charged for that same access to that park. I recognize that the history of many municipalities is complicated. The ability for municipalities to have parking and be able to make certain that people can safely access their beaches, and given the size, is an issue, which is why I believe this study bill is a good way to begin the conversation. Ultimately, we have to start to address how we're going to allow people to access not only state parks, but also municipal facilities. And I think Rep. Lamar, who I know is on this committee, was really saying, hey, listen, folks come to New Haven and they use the common areas that we have here, and municipal and the taxes that are paid by a city like New Haven. They sort of absorb some of the transport of folks who come to the cities. And shouldn't the municipal areas or areas that have these beaches, these public beaches that are municipally owned, shouldn't they allow for people to access them as well? I believe it's a complicated issue. I think there's some data that needs to be collected. I think the approach that's being put forward in this bill is a good beginning point. Again, I look at the GC3 as that process. The governor put forward an executive order, and we spent a year in a pretty detailed way looking at a number of issues dealing with climate adaptation. Ultimately, I think the idea, to your point, Jack, is to try and get people to be able to access the beaches in their nearby towns, and to be able to do that predictably and safely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, we were a little disappointed that it became a study to help people have access. I know my sister, who's a realtor, she was very interested. She called me up and asked me what was going on with that, because the realtors were buzzing about that, and so, well, thank you very much. It's nice to see you. Have a good night, and thank you, Madam Chair.
So Jack, I just want to follow up on a point that you made there, which is this is an environmental justice issue. I mean, it really is. The issue of being able to access municipal parks is something that really should be a right of the citizenry. I think the issue we're trying to focus on and understand is, why are the towns taking different approaches, and is there a common thread that we can come up with for every town across the state? The notion of 50% may be arbitrary. Is there a different way? And I would argue, given COVID relief package and some of the other things we have, we may be in a unique opportunity to actually find some federal funds to help do things. FEMA programs like the BRIC program and other programs are available, and maybe we can use some incentives to help make that happen. Hopefully federally funded type incentives.
That's great. It's thinking outside the box. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lafrance. Let me just see if anybody else has any questions from the committee. I don't see anybody else, but I did want to just touch a little bit on, the mean high tide line and what's happening with that in terms of just trying to educate folks so they understand once you're able to access the beach, that is public space. I'm not sure if your organization does get involved with that.
So I would argue, so Rep. Gupta, I would say that the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection has a great web link, and I'll make a point of following up with the committee and let folks know. Just go on the DEP's website and type in the public trust doctrine. They have a great map that basically shows that folks are effectively able to walk and have free reign up to the mean high tide line. In essence, that's the area of public trust that people are allowed to access. So if you're walking along the beach and you're starting from a public trust area, and as long as you stay within it and don't trespass onto someone's private property, you're entitled to be in that space. That basically dates back all the way sort of the Greek and Roman times, and it's been something that's been part of the Connecticut and United States jurisprudence for a long time.
Thank you. And a lot of it becomes challenging with the erosion that's taking place now. A lot of these shoreline towns, which had ample beach, probably don't any longer, and some of it butts right up to the walls that have been created, etc. So
that's a really great point, and I think it's something that we could certainly talk more about. But the whole idea of as climate change starts to bring up and moves property lines back and forth, there's a need for examination of that and how that's going to impact people's private property versus public property. And a lot of that will depend upon the specifics of that individual's title as to what they own. Do they own to the water line, or do they own a meets and bounds description, which makes things different? So if you're on a tidal river, it'd be different than being on the Long Island Sound.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to open up a fairly robust conversation by expanding it to these elements as well.
And
I know
we've been working in the towns of Guilford and Madison on something called the East River Marsh Project, where one of the things we've been starting to examine is this concept of an easement, about moving properties forward as tides move forward, to try and acquire easements so that there can basically create areas of protected areas for the tides to basically expand into, so that we would actually have a protected area to allow for the coasts to expand.
That's great. And I assume that would also help with, natural habitat creation then.
And another area I'll mention is there's the USDA has a program that the town of West Haven's worked with, where effectively people have been flooded out on a frequent basis. They actually their homes were purchased out and replaced with parkland or with open space. And that's a program from the United States Department of Agriculture through the NRDS program.
Yeah, that is a wonderful program. Absolutely. Let's see if anyone else has any other questions. Just checking.
The hours, I really appreciate the time. I really do.
No, thank you very much for testifying. At this point, I do not see anybody else. Thank you so much, Mr. Lafrance.
Thank you.
We're going to go on to Miss Paula Perlman from Connecticut Federation of Information Commission.
Yes, good evening.
Go ahead. There you are. Go ahead.
Good evening. Good evening, Representative McCarthy-Vahey and members of the Planning and Development Committee. My name is Paula Perlman. I'm a staff attorney with the Freedom of Information Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on House Bills 6448 and 6641. The bills propose in part to codify portions of the Governor's Executive Order 7B and amend the FOI Act to allow public agencies to meet remotely in addition to meeting in person. Under these bills, public agencies, if meeting remotely, would be required to provide the public the ability to view or listen to the meeting simultaneously using telephone, video, or other technology, and to include instructions in the meeting notices and agendas about how the public can access the meeting. In addition, House Bill 6448 requires that all public meetings be recorded or transcribed, and for those recordings and transcripts to be made available to the public. These are all steps taken toward increasing transparency and access for the public. The Commission, however, believes that some of the proposed language needs clarification. For example, phrases such as any relevant documents prepared prior to a meeting and as applicable in reference to the opportunity to provide comment and testimony, which is not required under the FOI Act, are ambiguous and open to interpretation and could lead to confusion at the agency level and difficulty in adjudicating complaints at the Commission level. In addition, both bills require that an agency member at a remote meeting identify himself or herself before speaking. This is certainly a best practice, but may be a difficult requirement with which to comply. Rather than making it a requirement under the FOI Act, perhaps it would be better to allow public agencies to establish their own rules for speaking at remote public meetings. Also, I would just like to make a point regarding posting requirements. Currently, under the FOI Act, some agencies are not required to post minutes online. It just seems counterintuitive to us that these bills would allow agencies to take advantage of conducting remote meetings, electronic meetings, but then at the same time not require that all agency agendas and minutes be posted online. Lastly, earlier today, some questions and concerns were raised regarding the public's ability to view and not just listen to public meetings. We certainly believe it's best practice to allow viewing. It's what we are striving for at the Commission. The FOI advisory opinion that was referenced earlier doesn't endorse telephone meetings only. The ruling cited is old and predates the wide-ranging availability of video. The decision mainly said there was no prohibition in the FOI Act against conducting—
3 minutes are up.
And that's my statement. Thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think it's really quite useful for everybody to understand sort of where there's strengths within what we can do legally and where we sort of fall down in terms of the language and the ambiguity that exists. I know from the municipal level and a lot of these folks on boards and commissions who are new to running meetings, you know, it's certainly they struggle with how to follow the rules and making sure things are noticed correctly, especially when there's no clerks assigned to them. So wherever we can tighten it up and provide guidance is certainly helpful. I'm going to jump right over to Rep. Winkler. Does have a question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your testimony. I'm a big fan of your agency. So I'm a little unclear. When was that advisory opinion?
That was 1981, I believe.
40 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess video was in its infancy back then, computer video. Okay, so what is the position of the Freedom of Information currently concerning video versus audio only?
It's the commission's position that the act requires that the public have access to the meeting, and it could be done by telephone, it could be done by video or other technology. That opinion at that time, it really was only telephone that was available. So the commission didn't held or opined that the FOI Act didn't prohibit conducting a meeting by telephone or speakerphone, but encouraged that there had to be means by which a member of the public could access that meeting if you were to hold it by telephone. So that remains the commission's position. In terms of expanding it to include remote meetings, as long as the public has access to view the meeting or to listen to the meeting, I think it would comply with the FOI requirements in terms of providing access to the public.
So I'm a believer that constituents should be able to see their representatives when they're in the meeting making legislation or whatever. I would be more than happy that the people calling in can do it by telephone or turn off their video or do whatever they want. But I do think that valuable information can be gained. For instance, is my legislator paying attention or is my town council person actually listening to me by actually watching the town council people? So I think it's important. If we were to put that in the bill, that the representative body had to be on camera, the members of the representative body had to be on camera, but the constituents could dial in any way they wanted. Do you think that the Freedom of Information Commission would oppose the bill?
I think as long as the public is allowed has access to that meeting, to be able to participate and see what the public officials are discussing and what's going on in the meeting, I don't see why there would be an objection, because they'd be able to view it or to listen to it. Or my understanding of one of the bills is that if there are members that are actually meeting and certain number of members are meeting in public, meeting together, that the public would have that opportunity to be present at the location that those members are physically present.
And that was a very clever anticipation on somebody's part. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Winkler. We have our Chairwoman, Kristen McCarthy-Vahey next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Ms. Perlman, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for appearing before GAE last week, I believe that was. The days are running together a little bit. I am reaching out with a question specifically about the public participation. And from your perspective, public participation well, let me ask this. Does public participation mean public comment?
Under the FOI Act, there's no requirement that the public be able to comment or provide testimony at meetings. That's done at the local level.
So there's no statewide freedom of information requirement that the public be able to provide comment at any given meeting?
Correct. Under, again, emphasize under FOI.
Right.
Correct.
So, right, the rules of a body or the rules of a municipality may say otherwise.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And I'm just curious about your opinion with respect to if there is a body that does allow public comment as a means of public participation, and there are people gathered in person in the room, as well as people online. And as we faced here in this committee last year, there become physical limitations. And I've seen this a few times during the pandemic, the number of people participating either at local or of course here at our hearings, the number of people participating has multiplied. And so back to that public comment aspect, just your opinion about how that would work in terms of who gets to testify when or to speak when, and would there be any freedom of information issues if, for example, there were folks in the room and they were able to testify and then there were folks online and they were not? Would that cause any issue within the freedom of information laws?
Under the current laws, it wouldn't be an issue because it's not a requirement set forth in the Act. So at this point, if an agency doesn't permit comment, it's not a violation of the FOI Act. I think if language was drafted and inserted into the FOI Act that would require allowing the public to comment or provide testimony at a public meeting, then that would be more of a concern, and then the commission would have to consider whether or not that particular provision was violated. So it'll depend whether or not it's actually written into the Act. So if it becomes a requirement under the FOI Act, then it's possible that if an individual wasn't permitted to speak at one of those meetings, then you could be in violation of the Act. But under the current law, and if it's not written in, then I don't see how it would violate the FOI Act.
Okay, so thank you. It's, I suppose, a theoretical conversation, just one of those practical realities for folks, as Rep. Goupil referenced, in terms of many folks who are not necessarily running meetings on a regular basis. And I'm thankful for the FOI trainings that you all do and that our municipalities do. I know CCM and COST and others also provide that kind of training to make sure that people are not running afoul of the law inadvertently. So I do look forward to ongoing conversations with you related to this. I believe, as I've said, and you probably have heard me say earlier, that this is the beginning of a series of conversations we're likely to have over the coming years as we adjust to this new reality. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Let's see if any. I do not see any other questions from committee members. I do appreciate your time this evening, Ms. Perlman.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too as well. We now have Mr. Demkowski from Town of South Windsor, the GIS network. And I apologize if I did not pronounce your name correctly. Please correct me.
You did fine, Representative Goupil. Thank you so much. I want to thank Chairman McCarthy-Vahey, Chairman Casano, ranking members and members of the committee for allowing me to share my testimony. My name is Thad Demkowski. I'm the GIS analyst for the town of South Windsor, Connecticut, as well as the current sitting vice president and municipal representative for the Connecticut GIS Network Steering Committee. I'm speaking to you this evening regarding an act concerning geographic information systems as raised by House Bill 6647 to extend my fervent support for establishing coordinated GIS at the state level. Today, as you've already heard, poignant testimony about all the bills being reviewed. In a multitude of instances, they all support this particular bill, and this bill supports all of them. Digital data, affordable housing, property taxation, crumbling foundations, all can benefit from a statewide GIS coordination. As you already know, we as a society use and rely on and depend on GIS every single day. I will guarantee that each of you here today have already used a GIS application and will continue to do so every day. Government at all levels also depends on GIS for a diverse multitude of functions. This includes planning communities, issuing permits, fighting crime, protecting the environment, responding to emergencies, disasters, or pandemics, and distributing assistance to residents when necessary. Moreover, it is important to acknowledge the value of formally centralized GIS. Just like any similar resource, it functions more effectively for the greater good when managed and governed by a centralized office to ensure standard operation, provide assistance with governance, and unite efforts to minimize and eliminate duplicity. Furthermore, by having a single entity that is focused on a particular resource, it can serve as an asset to assist those who have limited financial resources. A centralized, coordinated statewide GIS for Connecticut could provide all of this and more. GIS professionals have been working toward this statewide coordination for more than 2 decades without any success. As a result, Connecticut is currently a patchwork of data sets, data access, and data quality with both extreme redundancy and large holes. Among all New England states, Connecticut is the only state in this position. Other neighboring states have had great success with their GIS, using them to aid projects for state 911, statewide land use mapping, crumbling foundation mapping, mass transit improvements, environmental protection projects, and data collection projects that have provided their towns with critical information to help at the local municipal level. In Connecticut, GIS has been operating within multiple departments and state departments for more than 30 years. DOT, DEP, DEMIS, DESP, DPH all currently operate their own GIS divisions with similar staffing, similar challenges, duplicated efforts, and separate budgets spent on distributed software licensing. One could conceive a systematic integration process that could combine GIS from each department into a single centralized department, providing for better direction, more efficient use of staff, concentration of knowledge, and fiscal efficiency to better serve the state as a whole. State departments could benefit from the strength of a geographic information office instead of multiple isolated individuals in disparate divisions scattered across the entire organization. All municipalities across the state would benefit from defined data standards when addressing emergencies or disasters that fail to respect town boundaries. Furthermore, smaller communities who holistically have not been able to financially support GIS on their own would have access to the services, the tools, and the data so that they can utilize these benefits as well. In conclusion, Connecticut is long overdue for this and has lagged behind its neighbors for far too long. Based on the work and the findings of the GIS task force, I implore you to take this cause under serious consideration. I know that you can see the long-term benefits of a central coordinated GIS to exceed the cost and efforts to organize and implement such a critical government establishment. Thank you again for your time this evening, and I am more than happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. And I am impressed that you got all that in 3 minutes, because that really encompasses so much and why we are really in need of the system universally used. I do apologize. I do believe Rep Delnicki was first, I believe. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Thad, I would just like to recognize you and point out retired town manager Matt Galligan, Scott Roberts, former director of IT, now assistant town manager, and of course yourself and your team over there. for what you've been able to do. And as former mayor of South Windsor, I certainly salute you and the team of folks there. And I would encourage everyone to go on to the South Windsor website and take a look at the GIS system and just how easy it is to navigate, how intuitive it is. And it's a great tool. And I hate to tell you how many times I've used it, tremendously, a number of times. And also, when I was working for the Metropolitan District, we had a pretty good GIS system there, but I don't think it's as good as the one that South Windsor has. So again, I just wanted to recognize you and point out the fact that the South Windsor delegation, if you took a look at the bill, has co-sponsored it. So again, thank you for coming forward.
Thank you, Representative Delnicki. I greatly appreciate your kind words.
Well, you've earned them.
Thank you very much, Representative Delnicki. We have Representative Winkler.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I'm a big fan of GIS. We hired a youngster some time ago who did a lot of great work for our town. But it's, of course, more than geographical. Could you explain how data can be linked to objects and layers in such a way that you can actually almost data mine it for correlations or relationships that may not have been intuitive?
I'd be happy to, and thank you, Representative, for your question. I appreciate it. So GIS works on the idea of attributes that tie back to geographic features. If you can imagine our land diced like a layer cake, so that each layer of that layer cake represents something different, whether it's property ownership, whether it's zoning, whether it's transportation layers, whether it's utility layers. And each of those individual layers have attributes that are assigned to them, whether it's the size of pipes, the speed limit on a street, or perhaps the zoning designation of a piece of property. Well, each of those contains some sort of ID information. If you can find commonality within that attribute information between a particular layer and another data table, for instance, perhaps tying zoning to income and looking at where certain businesses are located within reach of certain income levels. You'd be able to draw correlations and conclusions to look at suitability studies to let you know where to put resources that those citizens may be missing. You may be able to look for food deserts to see where grocery stores need to be encouraged or those kinds of things.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Rep. Winkler. We have our chairwoman, Representative McCarthy-Vahey, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Mr. Dymkowski, I just want to say thank you so much for sticking with us. Your testimony was phenomenal. You really did pack a lot into it. And that's really kind of what GIS is, isn't it? There's a lot put into just that one data point can do a lot to help us. I have been very fortunate to work alongside the working group. And I wondered if you were familiar with the work of the working group conversations and what had happened through basically the summer and the fall.
I am, Representative. Absolutely, I've been following right along. As I said earlier, I'm the municipal representative for the Connecticut GIS Network Steering Committee, and I take that position really seriously. I think it's very important that my municipal counterparts are fully aware of the work that's being done by the task force, especially on this particular project. As I've said, it's been 30 years in the making that we've been pushing this initiative, and we've had some minor successes followed by failures. Senator Needleman was very instrumental in this most recent push, and you stepping in was a great welcome push for us. So absolutely, I've been following it along. And I find the details of the bill to be right on. I think that the task force did their homework, as was said earlier by my colleagues from the University of Connecticut. And so this is really something that the entire GIS community can get behind and is happy to support and is really looking to see come to fruition. we're hoping the rug doesn't get pulled out from under us again this time.
Well, Mr. Dunkowski, I want to tell you that I am incredibly grateful for your many, many years of effort, and I am very glad to be partnering with Senator Needleman to advance this effort, and I am not one to give up easily. So wherever we are able to get this year, I think we need to continue down that road. Something that you said about what GIS can do made me think a lot about the zoning conversations that we're having, but also about the vaccine distribution. And I just wondered if you could explain how, just specifically with vaccines, we use a lot of, I'm seeing maps in terms of where vaccines are located. How is GIS tied to that effort?
So many of the other states in the US have really started to use GIS a lot more for vaccine distribution. Here in Connecticut, the governor has taken an age-based approach. But in a lot of the other communities around the country, what they're looking at is those individuals who can't quite get to where the vaccines are, and looking at disparities within the population that prevent them from maybe owning a car. Maybe they rely solely on public transportation. And so perhaps efforts need to be made to locate a mobile vaccination distribution. Well, that's one instance where GIS can help by mapping where those individuals or where those clumps of individuals live to know a centrally located place to put that. So GIS can be very, very instrumental with vaccine distribution. But again, it really takes an effort at the state level to use and harness that technology and apply it in that way.
And thank you. I think that our DPH folks, I know you're municipal, so it's tough to answer some of the things that might be happening at the agency level. But from a municipal standpoint, certainly this is applicable to the conversations that we've been having about zoning. And I know that's been one of the things that's happened through a lot of the volunteers who have worked together to try and create a statewide inventory and map. But I just wanted to say thank you for your testimony, for the time, and I look forward to continuing to work with you and the other GIS providers to continue to.
Thank you so much. The pleasure really is mine.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have Senator Needleman next.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Representative McCarthy-Vahey, for really being the one to carry this with the working group. A really tremendous collaborative effort. And Thad, thank you. I know John's on also. And, you know, just to be clear, this came up not because I'm a land use professional or that because I've been doing this for a long time, just because as a first selectman, I know the restrictions that we're all under doing this town by town. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm not for the state mandating statewide GIS, but I think if the state had GIS available for the towns to opt in if they wanted it, it would go a long way to not having people who look at these maps stop at a border when there may be 20, 30, 50 properties that are half in one town and half in another. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And we've layered a lot of things into our parcel maps. I mean, it really helps. We've done it for utilities, fire protection, just a whole bunch of stuff that goes in there. MS4, we just use it for a lot of things. And, and you know, there's been a lot of talk about efficiencies. Managing data better is a major initiative of the governor. And I think that this falls right in line with that. So you were articulate, concise, thoughtful in your advocacy for this. And I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Needleman. Your efforts on this, starting this, motivation has really been a major boost in the arm, if you will, for our profession here in the state of Connecticut. So thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Happy to help. You're muted.
Thank you. I just want to thank you as well and thank all our, our chair, Representative Kristen McCarthy-Vahey and Senator Norm Needleman. And I know everybody else has been a lot of people working behind the scenes to push this forward. So I'm very hopeful. Thank you very much for your testimony. And at this point, we have next on our agenda.
Brian Rathbun.
Oh, there he is. Yes.
I hope I said that last name right.
Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you. I'm going to send you a message to see if your camera will work.
All right, let me try this. Is that better?
There you
That
are.
looks like it
Here we
might be working.
go.
There you are. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. First, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And my name is Brian Rathbun. I live in North Stonington, Connecticut. And I lived here since 1958. I'm a homeowner and a taxpayer. That's about it. And as a retired Connecticut citizen on a fixed income, I'm opposed to Bill number 1068, which is similar to Bill 172. It kind of mirrors it, which I had given written testimony last week on that. I believe Bill 1068 is a creative but a sneaky way to get more money through taxes and would put another burden on the Connecticut residents. There seems to be a punishment and a penalty to homeowners and taxpayers who live in a town that may not be able to reach the 10% housing requirement. I think affordable housing should be revisited and exemptions be put in place according to the town's infrastructure and character. 10%, I was told, is not carved in stone. Some towns like North Stonington have working farms. They have trails to hike. They have streams, ponds, and lakes to fish in. They have forests to hunt in. And they provide a habitat for wildlife. We have a natural aquifer which supplies clean water to many. These should be counted toward 10% because of their worth and need to be protected. I believe there are other ways for Connecticut to get revenue if needed, but to add another tax to the homeowner is not the answer. I believe it will only add to the people who are leaving Connecticut and discourage other people to move to Connecticut. The federal, the town, and the state taxes all seem to be going up. When I'm asked about how it is to live in Connecticut, because I've been here for a little while, I usually tell people, I says, you might be able to afford a mortgage, but you might not be able to afford the taxes. Like I said, there's different ways, and there's other taxes that are snuck in that people don't know about. And I've heard testimony earlier about people saying, that taxes, they don't really realize they're there. But I'm one of these people, I look at the different ones, and I remember when I paid my registration for my truck, I noticed there was $25 extra of tax on there. One was the passport to parks, the clean air
Your
tax,
3 minutes are up.
and the greenhouse tax. So anyways, I'm opposing the Bill 1068, and I appreciate you allowing me to have my voice in the matter, and I wish you all a good night.
Thank you very much. We do have a question from Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Rathburn, thank you so much for staying the day. And, you know, I really appreciate listening to your testimony. It was heartfelt and it was genuine. And sometimes we take it for granted. What's an extra dollar on people? What's another dollar? And it's really the straw that breaks the camel's back. And your willingness to offer your common sense voice is so important for us to hear. So I want to thank you for taking your time and sticking with us and offering your heartfelt testimony. It was so genuine and to me so effective that you're giving voices to so many people like yourselves that don't think that government cares about them. I hope that we demonstrate that we're listening to you and we are able to respect every hard-earned dollar that you have and not impose frivolous taxes imposed on you. So again, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate your perspective. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wong. We have Representative Fiorello does have a question as well.
Thank you. If I could share a very brief story, Mr. Rathburn, I have a young daughter who's 6, who's nearby, and she looked over and said, "Santa doesn't like taxes?" So I said, "Santa does not like taxes." No, but thank you so much for your testimony. I associate my remarks with Senator Huang, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I do not see any other questions. Thank you very much for sticking around with us late this evening, Mr. Rathburn.
You're welcome. Oh, I did mute, right?
All right.
I think I muted.
I believe our next person that I have showing. Do we have
Andy?
Andy Wainwright?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi there. I'll start my
Hello,
video.
Mr. Wainwright, go ahead.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you, Representative. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Are you trying to turn your camera on?
I think I tried to. I don't know how I look right now. I'm sitting on my porch.
There you
Hi.
go. Thanks so much.
Enjoying the night. Thank you, Representative. I'm Andy Wainwright from Stamford, and I am here to testify in opposition to 1068. I believe my experience as a resident in Connecticut is unique. I grew up, I live in Stamford. I've lived in Stamford for 30 years, but I grew up in one of the smallest towns in the state, Bridgewater, which is in southern Litchfield County. It has less than 2,000 people. And I attended one of the regional high schools there. That's another subject. But when I graduated college, I was elected to the Zoning Board of Appeals between 1988 and 1990. And that was right before I moved to Stamford. I served one term. And since living in Stamford in 1991, I've been keenly aware of the zoning let's say, controversies that have taken place in Stamford with a lot of the development in the South End, which is close to where I live in Chapin Point. And never once did I ever hear that the zoning laws were intentionally racist. I know that was part of a lot of the testimony during the first day of these hearings. The one thing I can share with you that the one common thing that zoning laws, from what I've experienced and what I've witnessed, between the two very different places that I've lived in Connecticut, is they protected communities against what are called predatory development and predatory developers. And it really raises an eyebrow that I have not heard much of that during this testimony. And let's say the alignment towards, the dominant political party and the contributions and the political influence that's placed to their advantage to try to push something like this on the state and remove the protections that local communities have to maintain the uniqueness of their communities. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wainwright. I'm just going to see if we have any questions. I do see a question from Representative Fiorello.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wainwright, for hanging on. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask if you could share with us, it's true, you're right, we haven't really addressed the fact that a lot of the affordable 830G upon which 1068 is based and the other affordable housing bills that don't really address affordable housing do remove barriers and fees for developers. And it certainly does seem like we make life very easy for developers with all this as of right building. We did have some people say earlier that 830G has led to predatory building. Can you explain what that means? What is predatory building?
Well, in Stamford, in the South End, there's been massive developments, and with a handful of maybe one or two developers getting the majority of, or all of the business, where they've torn down working class neighborhoods, which were primarily inhabited, at least for the last 30 years or so, by minority communities, working class communities. And what's gone up in our high rises and very modern buildings that house primarily wealthy, young, rich, white people. And I think that's not the intention, I guess, of the bills, but that's what the product, what's happened as a result of it. And I know that the city has oftentimes fined the developers, and then later somehow the fines get eliminated through some type of they're never really followed through on, and that's been noted for the last 20 years in the city of Stamford. And residents are not happy about it. Many of them are. It seems as though if you're a homeowner, none of us would ever get exempted from paying $1 million, $10 million fines for zoning ordinance infractions. Yet the large developers always seem to get favoritism, cronyism, the word you would refer to as cronyism.
These
that should scare everybody.
Do they use 830G to buy those properties and override the local zoning that might not allow them to build what they're building?
Representative Fiorello, I don't know exactly how they position themselves in this. I can only tell you what I've witnessed, and it doesn't feel right to a lot of the residents in Stamford, especially in those neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for bringing that perspective to our attention.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wainwright. Just checking, see if there's any other. At this point, we have no further questions. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Next, we have John Guskowski from Connecticut Chapter of American Planning Association.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Representative McCarthy-Vahey, Senator Cassano, and ranking members and members of the Planning and Development Committee. I appreciate your hanging in there and taking the time to hear from all of us. As Representative Goupil mentioned, my name is John Guskowski. I am the Government Relations Officer for the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association. We are a professional organization with over 400 members across the state, your town planners, regional planners, land use attorneys, planners in private practice. And we are here, we submitted on a number of bills this evening, but I'm here to speak specifically in favor of House Bill 6647, an act concerning geographic information systems. I had the great privilege of working with Senator Needleman and Representative McCarthy-Vahey for basically the past year on the GIS working group to help craft this legislation and this proposal, because we have recognized for many, many years, and my colleague, Mr. Dymkowski, I think said it much more elegantly than I did, how disorganized and how needed a statewide set of standards and statewide coordination effort has been for literally decades. So I won't make that case. What I will talk about a little bit is the process. We took, I think, a very deliberate planning process, and we gathered a couple of dozen stakeholders from across the state. These were experts in GIS from all sorts of departments and bureaus in the public sector and the private sector. And we looked at the problem, at how scattered our data is, how scattered our geographic information systems are, and looked at ways to solve it. And in so doing, we looked at our peer states. And in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, in Vermont, New Hampshire, across the Northeast, our peer states are eating our lunch in terms of having their geographic information systems act together. So as important as this is for public safety and public health and all kinds of coordinated efforts for emergency management and disaster recovery, this is also an economic competitiveness issue. And Connecticut cannot continue to be, in the words of one of our GIS colleagues, an adhocracy, letting every town, every agency, every department fend for themselves and figure out their own geographic information stuff. We need to act collectively. And so we're very pleased that this bill has made it this far. The working group asked for 3 things, and this bill provides about 1.5 of them, and we would like to see this bill go even further. We asked for 3 things, which was, one was an advisory council of expert stakeholders, and this bill does provide for that in GIS. The second is a freestanding agency that's led by a geographic information officer. This bill does create the position of geographic information officer, which is to be appointed per this bill from the OPM staff. And third, we asked for a stable funding stream and the authority of the geographic information officer and his or her staff for data acquisition and coordination. It is great that this bill, at long last, appoints a geographic information officer, which is critically needed, but it cannot be the responsibility of this one person, for which this person may have other responsibilities at OPM. It needs to be the job of an empowered and well-funded staff. And well-funded staff does not need to be that expensive. This is, again, in the words of one of my GIS colleagues, a rounding error of a rounding error of the state budget. It's a tiny amount to achieve so much in terms of our coordination and our ongoing efforts to make sure that Connecticut remains safe, remains resilient, and remains economically competitive from the standpoint of its geographic information systems. So in summary, this bill is an incredible first step and the culmination of an outstanding effort by Senator Needleman and Representative McCarthy-Vahey and a team of dozens of GIS experts. But it is the first step and much more needs to be done. So I would encourage you to move this bill along to the floor, beef it up, and let's get competitive with our GIS. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I think I think you said it all. I won't say that. Can we have Senator Needleman?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, John. Obviously, it's always great working with you. You know, the best example I could give for how this could work is what the state has done with the state radio system. It doesn't mandate anybody participate in the state radio system, but they built out a radio system infrastructure and have now offered it up to towns. And towns are finding that that level of coordination and using that system makes a lot of sense. Here, the value of the data is critical. For all the reasons that you have said, I just think that if you're not in tune with the need for data, you're going to fall behind, because the future is based on data. Data is the new currency, and it just doesn't make sense for a state this size with a population the size of Brooklyn, New York, having 169 solutions to mapping and 30 or 40 different vendors out there providing services that don't communicate with each other. So, you know, I talked about it a little. You guys with Chairwoman McCarthy-Vahey's lead have done a tremendous job in moving this forward. And I just can't say enough about the team effort and the inclusiveness in the conversation. It's really one of those efforts that should receive overwhelming bipartisan support, because to be competitive going forward, we need this. It's critical. With that, I want to thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Needleman. We have our chairwoman, Representative McCarthy-Vahey.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And John, it is my privilege and pleasure to thank you, along with Emily, as well as all of the amazing members of the working group from the various departments. I was remiss in earlier not specifically saying, you know, that we had folks from DPH, DOT, and DESP, and I'm going to forget folks, so forgive me. We had folks from the private sector. I'm really grateful that as you stuck it out here with us for today's hearing, that you focused on the issue of economic competitiveness, and that Senator Needleman really underscored the fact that data is probably the most valuable currency, and certainly one that we rely on so many levels for our day-to-day lives. But the economic piece of it is one that we haven't really talked about much. I also wanted to just thank you for recognizing those three separate pieces. And maybe if you could, you said 1.5. Can you talk for a minute about the GIS coordinator? I think there's always a concern that people have that, well, are you going to be taking over my job? And I continue to use the coalition model that I talked about with my substance misuse prevention. And if you could just clarify, one, the difference between a position and a designated person versus the head of an office, not a huge office, but an office. And two, the difference between the coordination aspect versus trying to do that work for the agencies that are out there.
Thank you, Representative. I think it's important to underscore that this isn't taking anybody's job. It is the creation of, is the recognition of the fact that there is a really important job to be done that nobody is doing. And all of the various GIS people at all of these different agencies and at the regions and at the municipality, someone like Thad in South Windsor, developing and keeping current the data for all of those different entities is critically important and will likely remain and perhaps even grow in importance. But as of now, there is nobody's job to draw all those things together and to work with an advisory board of experts to standardize the data and to create standards so all of this data can talk to each other and be shared, codified, and then served out to the public. So there are a couple of people at OPM currently that interact with GIS data. And my concern is simply the way that the language of this bill states is that the OPM shall designate an OPM employee as the geographic information officer. The way that's likely going to play out if no additional funding is provided is that this will become someone's job in addition to their existing job, which is already to manage the GIS that OPM currently manages, and will not have the time or resources to coordinate with those dozens of state agencies and hundreds of municipalities and other entities in a way that would be necessary to actually do the job that this bill is intending to do, which is to legitimately coordinate all of our geographic information efforts. So, the person at DOT, actually several people at DOT, several people at DEP, people at DESP, people at DPH, all of those folks are still needed to do the very important GIS work in generating that data and populating that data for all of the data categories and attributes that are necessary for their individual departments. But having a staff, a small staff of 3 to 5 people whose job it is to coordinate and work with all of those entities in a unified way is absolutely critical, because we are just not doing it. And in years past, we have had to rely on basically the goodwill of people like Thad Dimkowski and like Emily Wilson and Carrie Chadwick, who spoke, to take it upon themselves to go above and beyond and to coordinate things like statewide aerial photogrammetry that should have been the job of the state. That different people like Eric Snowden from CROG, from the Capital Region, took it upon themselves to help coordinate, because there was no single person at the state who could be said to be in charge of this. And unless it's somebody's job, and unless that person is empowered and capable of doing that with their staff, it's going to continue to be, done halfway or not at all.
Thank you for taking the time to explain that. I think anytime people hear the idea of adding staff, people start to, there's usually a reaction. But I think in this case, what we're talking about is having people who can help possibly save very likely save our municipalities significant funds with some of that acquisition. Emily referenced this earlier in her testimony, that there were communities that spent 6 figures gathering data, when in a coordinated effort that could save. So it could be a cost addition at the state level that could then save municipalities and provide additional tools to them. If you could just tell us, the Massachusetts GIS Center, what kind of operation? That's one that I know has been held up as a best practice, and I know that our folks on the working group interviewed people. Can you give us a sense of the scale and operation with that, and some of the things that they're able to do? Right.
So the Mass GIS, which if you just Google it like that, Mass GIS, you will find it, is an incredibly well coordinated and well run agency. It's an agency of about 10 to 12 people. Connecticut's wouldn't need to be that large. There are far more people and entities in Massachusetts. I think there's twice as many towns in Massachusetts to manage and all that data. But they have a dedicated funding stream from a couple of different agencies that each contribute a portion of their budget annually to the effort, and it's driven largely by their E911 and their emergency management department, recognizing that locational data is absolutely central to public health and safety. But they have developed, basically because they have this staff, they have been able to develop very good systems of data management, data acquisition, and data analysis to make sure that all of the municipalities running through their regions, their municipal planning agencies, are all on the same rule book, if you will. It's sort of a set of data standards that municipalities and other entities all play by, And MassGIS, because of their staff and because of their mandate, has been able to automate and standardize these systems in a way that makes MassGIS, the website, an incredible one-stop shop for municipalities, for anyone in private practice looking to do business in any of the many municipalities of Massachusetts, looking to develop a piece of property, looking to do some research, looking to coordinate land use and transportation. The geographic data doesn't end at a town line. It is a seamless document that sort of underscores the competitive advantage that Massachusetts has made through this investment.
Thank you very much for that. And again, I can't thank you enough for all the work that you've done. And you say going above and beyond. It's really you and so many others who are doing this work outside of the scope of your day-to-day jobs, and doing this, as a gift for the state. And it really has been a gift, the coordinated effort that you and so many others have put in. So I look forward to continuing the work on this with you this year and into the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I wonder if you could just help us a little bit with an example perhaps of how without the system we're really lagging with our economic competitiveness. What is it that brings the system, essentially helps with our development within the state? And I don't know if you can give sort of a feet on the ground example.
Well, I can tell you, in my day job, which I appreciate Representative McCarthy-Vahey noting. I think my family doesn't think necessarily on my Mondays I have a day job anymore. This is what I do on Monday nights. In my day job, I work for both municipalities and for private developers. And I can tell you that private developers, when they are looking for a project, let's say I have an apartment developer who is looking for new projects in competitive markets. And, this developer will ask me to track down, available parcels that are suitable. And the amount of layers that I have to go through in every single town in Connecticut to try to put together this information. Let's say even they're looking at the Northeast region, the NECOG region, which is where I do a lot of my work. To find suitable parcels, looking at all of the things like where are sewer and water infrastructure, where are wetlands, what is the developability, what is the zoning. I have to do this repeated process a half a dozen to a dozen times, looking in every individual town, where in a place like Massachusetts, where you have MassGIS and everyone is using the same attributes and you can move from town to town and do your searches. You basically do one search instead of a half a dozen or a dozen individual town searches. And that's even assuming that every one of those towns that I'm looking in even has that geographic information or even has it available on their local or regional website. And in many cases, it's just not the case. So, if I'm working for a developer who's looking to build something in, Thompson, Connecticut, up in the corner, or Webster, Massachusetts, just across the line, the search is going to be a lot easier in Webster, and that developer might just send his, set up his project there. And that's, it's an expenditure of, it's a tremendous waste of time.
Thank you very much. I know that a certain portion of the time was spent creating a system for real estate agents to upload that type of information to the state, available parcels around the state. And so this would really circumvent that whole process and make it available from the standpoint of professionals like yourself and just, the everyday average person looking for the additional parcel, maybe looking to start their own business. So I appreciate painting that picture of how it could be utilized in that way. Just going to check, see if there's any other questions from the members. At this point, I do not. I thank you very much for sticking around with us this evening, and I'm sure we'll see you again in another public hearing soon.
All right, it's a day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. We have Michelle Brodsky next, please.
Hi, I'm here.
You can go
Can
ahead.
you guys hear me?
We can see and hear you. Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
All right, so my name is Michelle Brodsky. I'm a senior at the University of Hartford, and I'm also the Young Americans for Liberty State Chair for Connecticut. So I'm particularly invested in Connecticut politics. And I also work with Representative Fiorello, and she was the one that actually told me about this bill. And I was doing some research, and I'm very against it. And I wanted to share with you guys why. So this is Bill 1068. So first of all, I think the problem is that affordable housing is a legal term. So you can, if according to the statute, if there was a house built before 1990, it might be classified as affordable housing, but not according to this law. And in Connecticut, there are a lot of houses that were built in the 1700s, the 1800s. So you're penalizing communities that have affordable housing, but don't fit under the legal definition. This is Law 126A, it's the Affordable Housing and Land Use Appeals. So even if you live in an affordable unit and it's not rent controlled, it doesn't count. So I don't think that we have accurate data on this. And I actually ran the math as an example, because I think that a lot of these bills are perhaps deliberately either ambiguous or just difficult to understand. So it looks like, we're talking about half a mil, a quarter of a mil. What are we even talking about, right? So this is for the under 2% affordable housing. So if the property's assessed value is 100,000, sorry, it's just some background noise, I'm going to move. So if the property's assessed value is, let's say, $100,000, and you're paying 27.68 per thousand of a mill, and that's consistent with the 2019 data in Milford. So that would come to $2,768. So then we add the 2 mills, which is the penalty. So the milling rate is 29.68, 2,768. That's a 7.25% increase in your property tax. And if you double the assessment and say your house is $200,000, that's over a 14% increase in your property tax. And what happens is we're going to end up disincentivizing people from either living there, from any kind of education or a career, because why go to medical school for 14 years or however long if you're just going to be taxed into oblivion? And also the problem is that rent controls don't even work from an economic stance. Pretty much all economists, right and left, have said that rent controls, whether they're price ceilings or price floors, don't work. So the problem is that it doesn't do anything about the reason that rents are rising. And that's that there's a lot of people who want to live in those areas, right? So it's the basic law of economics. When the demand for a product rises, the supply will rise until the quantity demanded is equal to the amount that the suppliers have available. So as long as there's no new construction, the natural increase in housing is just basically a game of musical chairs. So I think that's one problem. And it leads to shortages, and you basically end up taxing people out of their tax brackets. And then what? I mean, we've been taxing people in Connecticut for how long? And there's a reason that Connecticut is doing pretty miserably. This is just more government intrusion, and the free market will do its thing. It will work. So when you artificially inflate the prices of houses, you're not actually going to achieve anything. We have to deal with the root of the problem, not just taxing people, because then what's going to happen? What are we going to do then? We're going to use that money for public good. It never really works like that. And in that process, we're going to tax people out and disincentivize them. So I would recommend some kind of positive reinforcement. So psychology has shown that positive reinforcement works a lot better than negative reinforcement. So perhaps some kind of incentive if you get near the 10% of affordable housing, because we know full well that most of these communities are not going to get to 10%. So we're penalizing them based on an unachievable number.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brodsky. I have Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for coming in. I have to admit, I've been awake since about 4:45 this morning. It's now
Me
11.
too.
What you just done in the last 3 minutes was more energy and more words than I've probably heard all day. If you wouldn't mind, you recited, I know you were racing against the clock. If you wouldn't mind just giving me, you recite a lot of statistics. If you could just, summarize that in a, dumb it down a little for me. And I know you went through a lot of stuff, but I know you hit a bunch of statistics. If you wouldn't mind just giving me those once again a little slower.
Yeah. So this was just a math example that I decided to do because I was curious what the real world effect of the bill would be. So I did this last night. I'm exhausted. So let's see if I can work through my own math. All right. So this is for the qualifications under the 2% affordable housing. So I wanted to see what would be the worst case scenario. So this is the worst case. So I just guessed that. So I looked up the milling rate in Milford, which is 27.68 per thousand. It's a mill, right? So if and I can email this to you if you'd like. So the property's assessed value, let's say, is $100,000, and you're paying 27.68 per thousand, which is consistent with the 2019 data in Milford. So I multiplied that, and that's 2,768. So then you add the 2 mills, which is the penalty. So the milling rate goes up to 29.68 or 2,768. So that's a $200 increase. And then I did the delta, the change in the delta over, I did percent change formula basically, and that's a 7.25% increase in your property tax.
7.25%. Okay. That's a pretty significant.
If you're going with Milford,
okay, so that was an
yeah, and it goes up if you're. Yeah, and if your house is more expensive, let's say this was only for a $100,000 house. Let's say it's $200,000, it would be double that, and so forth.
Gotcha. So you have any idea what the average house goes for or is worth in Milford? My guess is it's somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000.
Yeah, so it would be more than that. This is a low estimate.
Okay, so you're talking about significant money.
And that disincentivizes people from basically everything else.
Right. Okay. Now I get it. Well, I appreciate it, and thank you for coming in, and thank you for explaining that to me in kind of dumbed down terms. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have Representative Fiorello, please.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for coming on and testifying. It's really great to see you. And I really love how you took the bill language and tried to apply it to a real case and what it would mean for a homeowner. And so from what you're finding, it's, that kind of punitive tax for your town not meeting the affordable housing requirement could mean hundreds of dollars out of people's pockets. And what does that mean to you when you come to that conclusion that it's hundreds of dollars for something that they can't control as to whether or not their town can meet these quotas? What comes to your mind as to what those dollars could be going to, and why does that bother you so much?
I think it's a waste of taxpayers' dollars, to be honest with you. I'm going to law school. I've been studying my butt off for the past 15 years of my life. I'm a hard worker, and I plan on one day having a lot of money and being successful. But a lot of people who are in my shoes ask themselves, why am I going to go to college, spend all of this money just for the government to tax me out of my bracket anyway? What's the point? And for me, it could be going to education. That's a big one. School choice. We need to focus on school choice. The education system is falling apart. There's a lot of studies on that there are racial inequalities in education all throughout Connecticut. So we need to fix that. And I think that the reason that Connecticut was once prosperous was because we didn't tax that much. And now we're being taxed in every single way. Like, Connecticut is so expensive. I moved back to Pennsylvania, and it's a blessing. I can actually afford things here. So with Connecticut, you're going to tax them even more. It's just, it could be going to so many better things, and it's disincentivizing people from wanting to live in good areas. And in the long run, it hurts education.
And then another question. So you are just graduating, and congratulations on being almost finished. And you're going to go to law school and, continue to improve yourself and create opportunities for yourself. And in your age bracket, you and your friends, do you guys talk about taxes? Do you pay attention to tax levels of the places that you might be going to?
Most people my age know. I mean, I pay for college on my own. and I'm pretty much financially independent. So that's something that I do have to think about. Most of my friends know. That's not something that people my age generally think about unless you have, extenuating circumstances, or when we're graduating, if we need to decide where to move, where to go to law school, then yeah, of course we consider that. I mean, Connecticut's expensive, Texas is not. So, so that is something. And a lot of people are moving out of Connecticut because it's just so expensive. Like I remember when I moved from Pennsylvania to Connecticut to go to college, at first I didn't have a job. So my mom would send me some money sometimes, and she would send me like $30. And the next day I'd be like, I need more money. She's like, what are you spending your money on? Drugs? Like, what's going on? And I would send her the receipt from the grocery store that everything is inflated. And that's what price floors and price ceilings do, because minimum wage and rent control are two sides of the same coin. So if you think rent control is going to work, go see how minimum wage worked in Connecticut, because everything is so inflated, it's ridiculous. Like cereals, like $9. Price controls don't work. That's really, you need a positive incentive of some sort. And I'm not an economist, so I don't know the details of what that would be, but it should be a tax break if you come close to the 10% of the affordable housing, not a tax increase if you don't, especially if you know that none of these communities are going to. I mean, what's the highest? What's the highest of them? Who's doing the best? I don't know, but I doubt that they're near the 10%.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Michelle. Great to see you.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Fiorello. We have Representative Delnicki.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming here to testify, Michelle.
Of course.
You touched on a very salient point when you made the comment about affordable housing that was built prior to the law and is not deeded and therefore is not considered affordable. Now, could you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is, I haven't done so much research because I only found out about this yesterday. So I kind of spent the night last night trying to read up about it. But so I can pull up the actual law because I wrote down the name of it. It's the, where is it? Law is the 126 Affordable Housing and Land Use Appeals. So basically it's just if it's not built before 1990, I think, yeah, then it doesn't count as affordable housing. But like if you have something built in 1989, let's say, right, and it still fits all of the qualifications of quote unquote affordable housing, it still won't count because it was built before 1990. And Connecticut's pretty old, right? So there are a lot of houses that are 1700s, 1800s. And they won't count. And it's the same thing with an affordable housing unit that's not rent controlled. So the parameters for it to be considered under this program are just very specific.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that, and I'm a great believer in people developing and building generational wealth. And when I was on the town council, periodically we'd have people come before the council and they'd say, I have a deeded affordable housing home. Any way I can get the restriction taken off, because I've done a variety of improvements to make their life better and to accentuate the value of the home. Yet they couldn't. And conversely, we have tremendous housing stocks of homes that are built in the 50s, 60s, 70s that are more than affordable. Literally, they go on the market and they are sold within a day or two. If they go that quickly. And they're not considered affordable, yet they are. They truly are. And people take great care of them. And they do improvements and they build generational wealth there. So it's almost like it's counterintuitive.
Yeah, and I think that another big issue is that it can basically lead to the decay of the rental housing stock. Like, why would the landlords invest any money in maintenance? They can't get any of their money back by raising rents because there's an artificial price ceiling. So they're not going to want to take care of it. I think it's very similar to the 2008 housing crash. When you give people things for free, they're probably not going to value it. When you don't allow people to raise the prices, they're not going to have any kind of incentive to make the place any better. They're going to fall apart.
Well, I certainly appreciate you coming forward, and I really appreciate you coming forward. And I think you woke everybody up, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Michelle.
Of course.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Ms. Brodsky, for your testimony. We now have, is Frank Farraker available?
Mr. Farraker, if you can turn off your mic, or if you can turn it on and turn on your camera. Mr. Farraker, you've been on the meeting since 10 a.m. There's no way that you're not here. All right, Ms. Chair. I think we might have to go to Michael McGlaris and then see if maybe Mr. Farraker we can double back to him.
All right, let's go ahead. Mr. McGlaris, you can go ahead.
You're muted.
Just not, you need to unmute.
Indeed, I do need to unmute. As you could see my mouth moving. I can get a rise out of Tom Delnicki when he can't hear me. I know that. Good evening, Madam Chair, and members, senators. I'm here to speak very briefly in support of House Bill 6646. I've provided you with testimony, but I'm going to let you off the hook and not read it. And instead, I'm going to give you a couple of points and thoughts to take away about the crumbling foundations crisis, because we've made some great progress. So I'm Mike McGlaris. I'm superintendent of what's called the captive. We call it CFSIC for short, which are its initials, Connecticut Foundation Solutions Indemnity Company. Mercifully, we call it CFSIC. And this month, in March, we are celebrating an important 2-month anniversary, because it was on March 8th of 2019 that we actually lifted our first home and started the process of work on that home. And I'm very pleased to report to you that in about 10 days, we will hit number 300. That's 300 homeowners, taxpayers back in homes with safe and secure foundations. We have to date paid almost $59.5 million in claims. I've got about 25.6 waiting in line to be paid. We carry $73 million of claim reserves on known crumbling foundations in the Northeast, primarily in the Northeast corner of Connecticut. Vernon, 351 claimants. Tolland, 228. Stafford Springs, 167. And many of you know those numbers because we've been hard at work now for 2 years trying to abate this crisis and to return these homes to their families intact and to the tax rolls as well. In my testimony, I raised 3 asks, and those asks have in the past 24 hours diminished to 2 asks, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Ask number 1 in 6646 is that you do away with our sunset date. We are scheduled at CFSIC, at the captive, to go out of business on June 30 of 2022. If that holds, what I'm going to start doing in the month of September of 21 and this year is we're going to begin to wind the company down so that we can literally close our doors on June 30 of 2022. We must retrain someone else to do the management of our claims. We have 1,729 claimants. That's over 200 pages of verified foundation claim information times 1,729. We'll have to transfer that information. So my first ask, very respectfully, is eliminate our sunset date. If you get rid of our sunset date, we'll be able to continue our work. We would like to continue that work, and we think we've proven that we can do it. The second ask is that we are scheduled to receive 9 more payments from the Healthy Home Surcharge. That's the 4 cents per day that citizens across Connecticut, all of you who own a home and myself, we all are being assessed essentially 4 cents a day by our commercial insurance companies to help these families in need who have nowhere to turn. That Healthy Home Surcharge is due to end in June of 2030. If I can get that extended, as this bill calls for, as 6646 calls for, if I can get it extended to 2041, I can take the crumbling foundations crisis off your plate. It will be gone based on all the data we see. For the next 20 years, if we can get those Healthy Homes funds provided to us, we are going to return close to 97% of the tax abatement problem in the towns in question. We're going to put another 1,500 families plus back in their homes and safe and secure foundations, return the real estate market to the way it was before the crisis, and return equity to these victims who are victims through no fault of their own. There was a third ask, or one more ask, in my testimony, and that is to permit us to have a bond extended to us, guaranteed by Healthy Home Surcharge funds. That bond would have come from CHAFA. My understanding is that I read yesterday that CHAFA has filed some testimony indicating there are some challenges to that request. And what we need, I and my board of directors, is an opportunity to circle back with CHAFA, address their concerns, find out what their issues are, so we can address them head on. And Madam Chair, we are very eager to engage with CHAFA at this point, because if we can get monies pre-funded to us that are securitized by the Healthy Home Surcharge funds, we can keep the momentum going in construction. And by this time next year, we're looking at close on to 600 to 650 families back in their homes, if that can happen. So that third ask with the bond with CHAFA, we're sort of temporarily, we're moving off the table until we get more information from CHAFA about their concerns. And we can circle back with them and address those concerns fairly. But the two important issues that I ask you urgently and respectfully to consider is get rid of our sunset date so we can continue our work. And then importantly, extend the Healthy Home Surcharge to 2041. If you drive up Interstate or Route 84, this crisis begins at exit 63. If you leave exit 63 and you go 12 to 15 miles in either direction, as you head up 84, by the time you hit 73, 10 exits, 97% of this problem exists in that locale. These families are hard hit. The economy is suffering greatly, but we've done our share by replacing almost 300 foundations. That's more than 12 a month in the 24 months that we've been doing this. That's my request, and that is a summation of my testimony, and I'm very pleased to take any questions, Madam Chair, that anyone may have.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Representative Winkler had raised his hand first. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yes, good to see you again. So this bill does everything you want except for the extension of the money?
It does everything we want, and it was going to do everything we want with the CHAFA bond pre-funding, securitized, represented by these Healthy Homes annual installments. But we learned on Sunday that CHAFA had some concerns, administrative, perhaps legal concerns, and we need to assemble our team and meet with them and address their concerns. That's only fair. We want to make sure that we're having an open and transparent dialogue with them. But if you take that issue and move it to the side, and I think we'll be able to resolve that. The two asks that we desperately need is get rid of our sunset date. Everybody knows that's a problem for us, and extend the Healthy Home Surcharge. That's vital. The $220 to $240 million that we will get if you extend the Healthy Home Surcharge will put 1,500 families back in their homes. If I don't get that, I will leave close on to 1,000 behind when the Healthy Home Surcharge runs out in 2030.
I don't see the Healthy Home Surcharge in the summary of the bill. Is it in the text of the bill?
It is. I don't have the bill open, I'm sorry to say, but I believe that the Healthy Home Surcharge is referenced, using the calendar year 2041 as the date that we're aiming for. And that's a calculation, if I could, Representative Winkler, that's a calculation based on early discussions with Treasurer Wooden and his staff about what the bond, the pre-funded bond might look like if we got that much guaranteed source of revenue and annual installments. So that's the derivation of the actual year.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go on to Representative Delnicki.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mike. Good to see you.
Good to see you,
Great
sir.
job.
Thank you.
And it's amazing what you've been able to do in a short period of time.
Thank you.
Now, bear in mind that there is a bill in insurance and real estate pertaining to the healthy home surcharge and extending it. So I'm pretty sure there's more than one committee that actually has that.
I think that may be the case, and I'll take the date that is the longest date that they can offer me. That's a small joke, Tom, late at night, so.
Mike, I'm used to your sense of humor. The bottom line is you get things done, and that's what's important.
Well, what I'm asking for is I'm asking for 4 cents a day. If you divide $12, Representative Delnicki, by 365, you get 4 cents a day. And I don't have any problem raising 4 cents a day from people in Ashford and Tolland and South Windsor and East Windsor and Manchester. I want people in Stamford and Greenwich and Norwalk, where I have a claimant, and Danbury and Wilton and Westport and Fairfield, to say that's a worthy cause. 4 cents a day to help people who have no place to turn is a worthy cause.
Well, the bottom line is the more homes we get back with solid foundations, the better off we are, not just as the eastern part of the state of Connecticut, but the entire state of Connecticut, because quite frankly, the crumbling foundation issue, if you're in another state and you're looking at Connecticut, you say, gee, that's a real problem. I don't know if I want to move there.
Yeah.
So it's one more multiplier to get the foundations repaired, get the people put back in their homes, restore the properties to full tax base, and go from there. And prove the fact that we can do something successful to help these folks.
Yes, who are victims through no fault of their own, Representative Delnicki, through no fault of their own.
That's right, and we do have here in planning and development Corey standards, I think, that will ensure that no other area in Connecticut will become a victim of crumbling foundations.
Indeed.
Well, again, Mike, thank you for coming forward. And needless to say, you know you have my support.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Delnicki.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you,
Chair.
Representative Delnicki. We have Chairwoman Representative McCarthy-Vahey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. McGlaris, excuse me. It's wonderful to hear your voice. You have such a great voice, and I appreciate you joining us at this late hour. You hit on a lot of the things that I was thinking about, and one of the things you did mention in testimony is if that healthy home surcharge were to be extended, that you would be able to address all of the problems that you anticipate with homes. And I think that's important. You know, we talked about this before in this committee, that the numbers, you know, you've been able to pretty clearly identify as far as you can tell at this point. Is that an accurate statement?
It is indeed. I'm not sure what the end of this crisis is, Representative McCarthy. I don't know the date that this crisis ends, but I'm going to fix this crisis for the next 20 to 25 years if I get this healthy home surcharge extension. I know it because that's what the data sings to us about every day. We have 1,729 claimants times 200 pages of data. I know where you live. I know the width of the crack in your foundation. I know when your home was built. I know who insures it. I know the square footage. We've got all the data we need to extrapolate geometrically where the solution lies. But I can tell you now that if I can get this done, we're going to pull off a miracle by getting this off your plate and allowing you to direct your attention as legislators to other meaningful and important matters. I pledge to you that we can do that if we get this done.
That's certainly welcome news. Speaking of getting things done, I also wanted to touch base about the condos.
Yes.
I know that one, you know, took a little bit longer. Can you just tell us why?
Well, condos, as you know, when you own a condo, or you may know, you own the unit that you live in, but you don't own the foundation. It's actually the association that owns the foundation. And with respect to your home where you live or my home where I live, we make individual choices about which contractor is chosen. We negotiate individual pricing with that contractor. If you've got a condominium association with 40 or 50 or 60 or 80 individual units, you're hearing 80 voices, and you've got to convene a board of directors and go through numerous negotiations. It's not surprising, therefore, that it took a long time for construction contracts to sit through the process, for boards of directors to meet and make decisions. So it's a recognizable issue. Having said that, we are raising this Saturday, I'm going to lift my first condominium building off the ground 7 feet in Willington, Connecticut, Willington Ridge. We normally don't talk about our claimants and give their names, but the board of directors of Willington Ridge has made it public that they're happy with what they're doing. 34 families, 6 buildings. We're going to lift them off the ground and put all of those families back on a firm footing. And when I get my next tranche of money, I hope in June and July, Connecticut Bond Commission funds, my last piece, and Healthy Homes funds, with that 31 or 32 million, I'm going to put 51 more condominiums in line. And those are primarily condominiums in the Vernon, East Windsor, and related areas. So we're making up for lost time, Representative McCarthy. I think that's the best way to say it at this point.
Well, that's great news. And last question is just in terms of pending claimants. So you're taking applications, but only for pending claimants. If you can just clarify that for us, and that'll be my last question, Madam Chair.
I'm happy to have your questions. A pending claimant, we have 3 classes: active, inactive, and pending. If you're active, you are anywhere from getting your foundation remediated now to being close to it. If you're inactive, there's something missing with your application, and we can make you active relatively quickly. If you're pending, I don't have the money to fix your foundation. I'm allowing you to register your claim because I want to know where you live, and I want to know the depth of your problem, and I want to know how we can help you. And we're treating you as if you were an active claimant, even though we don't have the money to do your foundation. If the sunset date holds on 2032, I'm going to leave 700 pending claimants behind. If I get the sunset date moved to 2041, I will leave virtually no pending claimants behind. That's the difference. They're in line, and I know who they are, Representative McCarthy, but I haven't got the money in my budget because I know what my income stream is. So the sooner we move the Healthy Home Surcharge date, the more revenue we get, the faster we put people in line. And that was the whole issue behind the CHAFA bond. If CHAFA could give us $80 to $100 million, I can securitize that bond with future Healthy Homes revenues. If the date is extended, CHAFA lodged some concerns about that, and as I mentioned earlier, we're going to address those head on in a good conversation.
Thank you for that clarification. It's a helpful point of reference.
Thank you.
And thanks again for all of your good work.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I have Representative Delnicki for a second time.
Yep, just good. I'm not on mute. Just one quick comment, Mike. Take a look at Senate Bill 1042, lines 126 and 256, and I think you'll see exactly what you're looking for.
Do I have to do that tonight, Tom?
It's a homework assignment.
All right, thank you.
Come on.
I'll pen that for the morning.
Sounds good, Mike. But that exact concern about the sunset date and the Healthy Home Surcharge are in that bill.
Thank you very much for bringing that to my attention.
Take care. And again, thanks for the work that you're doing and the lives you're putting back together. Thank you, Madam Chair.
It's a real privilege to do the work we're doing. Any other questions?
Thank you so much. I do not see any other questions this evening. Thank you so much for staying this late with us, Mr. McGlaris, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. So are we able to get Mr. Frank Farraker on?
Mr. Farraker, were you able to turn on your mic and turn on your camera? I left you a couple of messages. Okay, so that's a no.
All right, we will be going on to Miss Beth keeps jumping around. McGillivray.
Okay, can you hear me? I don't know why the audio isn't on, or the, oh, there.
We can hear and see you. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and other representatives. I'm going to try to make this quick. I know there's been a lot of very valid points today. I am here to oppose new legislation designed to change our planning and zoning in Connecticut, specifically 1068. This legislation moves to have Hartford control decisions for affordable housing in all of Connecticut. This is a cookie cutter approach that dictates from Hartford without hands-on local experience, which sidelines planning and zoning from individual towns across a diverse landscape. Every town is considered the same. In Greenwich, this means that our planning and zoning and our large, over 200 plus representative town meeting will have zero impact on affordable housing directives. Instead, Hartford can embrace builders to erect affordable housing with their requirements. With a bureaucrat in Hartford, one wonders how they will determine that these builders follow best practices. How can they manage implementation? Builders and their subcontractors may start off at an expected quality level, but my prediction is that quality may suffer over years. Builders can cut corners, and who will know? The tenants will suffer, and the builders will be on to their next project. As time passes, I see builders using this legislation as an opportunity to build cheap housing and moving on to their next money-making project. What will this affordable housing look like in the future? Substandard instead of something a local town will be proud to host? Local towns will have a vested interest in affordable housing if they are in control and their local representatives are present and involved in the process before, during, and after. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We have a question from Representative Winkler.
Yes, thank you. I can certainly understand your opposition to the bill, but I don't understand why affordable housing means, for instance, that the building inspector will no longer do his job, or that any of the requirements for housing won't be implemented. It just seems to me that I can't understand why the building inspector would suddenly not do their job because a developer came into town.
I'm talking about the simplification that is happening in Hartford. That there's sewage, there's local traffic, towning, other town issues. There's issues of architecture. And when everything happens out of Hartford, who knows how the town can keep up with it. Inspectors miss things. I built my house here in Greenwich. I went through 3 builders and the town was here inspecting it too. But when you start to unload everything on Hartford, you've reduced the likelihood. Like we have a beautiful complex, Putnam Green, that was set up by the local town. They're invested in it. They want to see it to fruition because this is their baby. When the baby is in Hartford, they don't really care that much.
None of the building inspector's job, nor none of the rules about sewage or anything else would be touched by this bill. And I do have faith that our building inspectors would continue to do their job. Thank you, Madam.
You're making the you're telling us where it has to happen, and that doesn't take into planning and zoning. Why do we have planning and zoning locally? Because they know what's going on locally.
When you say where, do you mean we're actually going to point to a lot?
Well, the builders are being directed by Hartford. This is what you're putting together the directives, and then the builders are going to go find a spot for it.
We understand the bill differently. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Winkler. We have Representative Fiorello.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that, basically there are so many bills out there, and we have put lots of different details in different bills in front of different committees. And this is exactly what happens when citizens are trying to stay on top of them. But if Rep. Winkler is trying to make the point that 1068 exactly is not a TOD or Main Street mandate bill, then that's duly noted. But 1068 is the bill that says if you don't reach 830G, and 830G is an older legislation that does override local zoning, and that has, had some would say wreaked havoc on towns, or has allowed predatory building, as some have said about 830G in our 30-year experience with it. So I don't think that the comments that Ms. McGillivray are saying are not valid. That said, thank you so much, Beth, for hanging on and sharing your thoughts and concerns about the whole spate of bills, including the one before us that would tax our town for not being able to reach the 10% threshold. And clearly you care a lot and you're worried about it, which is why you waited on another night until 11:30 to make your comments. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. McGillo. Nope, I just can't speak in this way. Ms. McGillivray, is that correct? Yes. I think I got it correct earlier. Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any other names at this point. I'm going to pass it back to our chairwoman, Representative McCarthy-Vahey.
Thank you very much, Representative Goupil. And before we close out this hearing tonight, I just wanted to offer Representative Zullo and Senator Wong the opportunity to make some final remarks. Representative Zullo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been an enlightening experience once again to listen to all the testimony throughout the day. Clearly, people staying on for this long of a period of time, right up to the very end, goes to show you how invested people are and the issues that we're dealing with. And I always joke that the content of this committee is a little bit wonky, but it's not actually, now that I see the emotion and the interest of people from across the state. These are things that affect people on a day-to-day basis and that they're very passionate about. And so it's a privilege to have been able to listen to that. It certainly opened my eyes additionally, and I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to hear everybody's comments. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to everybody who held on the entire day and who testified. We appreciate the input.
Thank you, Representative Zullo. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank everybody else who stayed on and all the people that stayed on and offered their testimony. It's greatly appreciated for all the different viewpoints, and I did appreciate your hard work on the GIS component. You deserve to be complimented on it, and I'm eager to move forward, and thanks to everybody for the good work on the committee.
Thank you, Senator Wong. I just want to echo the thanks as well, especially to the folks who are behind the scenes, who we don't see. The clerks who are here, of course, Camilo, but all the others who help with uploading testimony and all of the work that gets done that we're not seeing, just like that GIS that we talked about. I also thank our attorneys for their work as well to fully draft all these bills that we have heard through the public hearing process. And most of all, would like to thank the public for your input, for sharing your thoughts, for taking the time to be with us. And we've spent a lot of time together in public hearings as a committee. I think more than we have, well, certainly in my time as a chair. And it's very much appreciated. It really does make an impact. And I think we've all learned a lot. I want to acknowledge two other things. One is that we had some really difficult and uncomfortable conversations tonight in our committee. And I appreciate that there's just some pain, some frustration, some anger, and a lot of different feelings. And my hope is that we can continue to learn from that and move forward from this experience. And then second, I just want to acknowledge the terrible tragedy that has occurred in Colorado tonight with a police officer and a number of other people who have died in another mass shooting, and just put those folks, those families, those first responders, those community members in our thoughts and prayers as we conclude our hearing tonight. And with that, I thank you all very much, and we will gather again for our JF meeting in the light of day. Hope you all get some good rest.